Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Fanfiction podcast. Today we will be starting our new journey of playing for both sides. A special fanfiction in which Izuku Midoriya becomes both a villain and a hero. So, before we start, do not forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel for future content. The day fate stood still. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. Friends. DVD 181 presents Playing Both Sides. A My Hero Academia story. Tenko Shimura had always wanted to visit UA High School. Earlier in his life, it was because of a strong desire to be a hero alongside his elder sister Hana, despite the small issue of his quirklessness. He admired their facilities, their faculty, and their record for producing amazing heroes like All Might. He never thought he'd go, yet now that childhood dream had finally been realized. "Greetings, you annoyingly heroic children," the white-haired young man said in a raspy tone, increasing the volume on his microphone as a camera drone circled him. "My name is Decay, Field Commander of the League of Villains. On behalf of Prometheus, our Grand Commander, I'd like to welcome you all to today's guest lecture." As UA's Hero Class 1A bunched up behind their homeroom teacher, Eraserhead, no less, one of the few heroes Tenko genuinely admired, the villain leader's gaze zoomed in on one student in particular, whose face bore a look of surprise and fear, but whose eyes exuded confidence and a hint of glee. "Game's on, little brother. Or perhaps I should address you as boss. All it takes is one small deviation to change fate. The right person being in the wrong place at the right time can truly make all the difference in the world and change the course of history for once and for all." Perhaps in one world, Izuku Midoriya's story would see him grow up quirkless and fatherless, eventually to inherit the power of one for all, take all Might's mantle as the symbol of peace, and end the generations-long battle of the brothers in a climactic fight against Tomura Shigaraki, the new symbol of fear. This is not that story. But, just like in that original timeline, our tale begins with a simple spot of bad news. "I'm sorry, kid, but it's probably not going to happen. You're quirkless," the bald doctor said, swiveling around in his wheelchair to face his patient. "Huh?" the green-haired child managed in shock, while his mother's eyes narrowed with a quiet fury at the doctor's dismissive diagnosis. The man tapped a few commands on a tablet and a nearby screen displayed X-ray images of a human foot. "Listen, young man, most people who have quirks have developed pinky toes without a joint as a sort of transitional streamlining of human biology as our species evolves. As you can see, the typical human, now a quirked individual, roughly 80% of the population, does not have that toe bone, while your foot does. This test is about 96.23% accurate in determining whether or not you'll develop a quirk. And what about the other 3.77%? Inko demanded, a hint of irritation in her voice from the man's callousness. "We can do a blood test if you're truly in denial, but it is unlikely to change the outcome significantly. Best you can hope for is something minor and/or invisible," responded the doctor, before the increasingly irate green-haired Mama Bear could voice more of her irritation. Towards the man, her son pulled on her shirt sleeve. "Izuku?" she asked as he looked up at her. "I don't want to be here anymore. Let's go home," the toddler said in a strained voice. Inko acquiesced to her son's request, picking him up off the chair and turning to leave. "Wait, you forgot to schedule your next appointment," the bald doctor began, only to be cut off by a furious glare from his patient's mother. "Given your callous behavior in crushing my son's dreams, I will be seeking out a different pediatric doctor," Inko said in a tone of mock sweetness. "Thank you for nothing, Dr. Tsubasa." As the door swung shut behind the green-haired woman, the man inside turned to his desktop monitor setup, and began typing furiously. "Lord is going to have my head for this. Unless I can produce some good results on the high-end project," muttered Dr. Kudai Garaki, or as he was known at Musutafu District Hospital, Kenshi Tsubasa. Later that evening, Inko Midoriya pushed open the door to her husband's study. "Hisashi." Midoriya, love of her life that he was out on a business trip at the moment, and so her son was using the guest account on the computer again, probably to watch the same video of All Might's debut that he had added hundreds of views to on his own. As she did, young Izuku turned around, the voice of All Might continuing to blare a reassuring message from the computer speakers. They felt more hollow than reassuring to Inko at that moment. Tears filled the boy's eyes as he pointed at the screen, asking his mother the fateful question that he wanted an answer to so badly. Can I be a hero? A hero just like him? At that moment, Inko was overcome with a wave of sorrow, rushing over and embracing her unfortunate son. I'm sorry, she sobbed, holding Izuku in her arms. If only I could be better, if only I could say yes, I truly wish you could live this dream. While his sorrowful mother embraced him, Izuku's stare became less teary and more dead. It's true, not all men are created equal. This world isn't fair. At that moment, something began to slowly bend inside him. His innocence. Maybe his sense of morality. Whatever it was, the young brunette had one thing he was sure of after this day. I don't like it. Little did anyone know what the implications of that change in his mentality would be. A day later, at preschool, the green-haired boy was confronted during recess by some acquaintances of his, much to his chagrin. So Deku, your birthday was yesterday. What's your quirk? Demanded Katsuki Bakugou, the red-eyed blonde son of Inko's best friend, Mitsuki. His quirk, explosion, allowed him to sweat nitroglycerin from his palms and detonate it at will. Given this quirk's strength, he had become even more brash, cocky and arrogant over the past several months than he was before. Is it telekinesis like your mom, or fire breath like your dad? Asked Hiroki Tsubasa, grandson of the bald doctor that had diagnosed Izuku's condition. His quirk, red wings, was a very visible pterodactyl wing mutation that allowed him to fly just above the ground. He could probably fly higher if it wasn't for his love of very unhealthy snack foods affecting his physique. Maybe it's a combination of both and he can be a firebender, proposed Soshiro Yubiri, who actually had no special connection to Midoriya whatsoever and was just there. He was born with a transformative quirk called long fingers, which currently let him stretch them up to 50 centimeters in length. I actually don't have one, Midoriya admitted, which instantly silenced all three other children. After a few moments, Bakugou spoke up again. You what? Why, you heard me, Kaken. Tsubasa's grandpa said I have the extra toe joint and I probably won't get one, the greenette continued, not noticing the hostile silence from the other three toddlers. But that's not the end of the world, I can still. A small explosion cut him off. You can still do what? You're quirkless, which means my nickname for you really was accurate, you are useless. Bakugou berated him. Kaken, that's mean, Midoriya retorted, but the other three only laughed. You, quirkless? I wonder if that's contagious? Tsubasa said in disgust. I'll have to ask Grandpa, but I'm sure he'll agree with me. Hey, I wonder, does being quirkless mean that quirks don't work on him either? Wondered Yubiri aloud. Maybe we should test that. I don't like where this is going. Midoriya thought as the other three children turned to him, malicious grins on their faces. One fairly brutal beatdown later, as he lay on the playground while covered in bruises and small burns, Izuku Midoriya had only one thought as he stared at the sky. Kids are cruel, but maybe so is this world. The years drug on after that, and so did life for young Izuku Midoriya. Preschool became primary school, and new classmates meant new people for Bakugou and company to turn against him for his quirklessness. As time flew by and the young boy became more aware of the world around him, more observant of his peers, and developed his personal code of ethics, he also became more and more jaded towards society. Why is it that I became a communal punching bag for a biological reality that I had no control over? He wondered, laying face down in the dirt after being beaten up by Bakugou. and his lackeys for protecting one of his classmates from them. The boy in question wasn't even thankful to him afterwards, doing little more than nudging him with his foot to make sure he wasn't dead before running off. Why is it that the teachers actively cheer on discriminatory behavior and outright bullying when it's done by the kids with heroic quirks, but shut down any attempts to fight back by those of us with weak, villainous, or no quirks? The dark thoughts in the back of Midoriya's mind continued to fester and grow as he watched a girl with a heteromorphic spider quirk get mercilessly bullied by one with X-ray vision, before he got up to go take the heat off of her by being the quirkless wonder again. I hate this concept of rising stars, and the idea that they need to be protected from any sort of consequences. What's wrong with society that we let so-called heroes get away with literal murder if they claim they felt threatened or were busy fighting a villain and caused collateral damage? He wondered, watching the sand hero, Snatch, get a not guilty verdict for suffocating several people to death with his sand while defeating the cannibalistic villain Moonfish. Snatch was lauded for his heroism in doing so by a press release from the Hero Public Safety Commission's head office in Paragon Plaza, something that disgusted the child even more. And can anyone even do anything about it? Little did he know that his life was about to be forever changed when he woke up on his 8th birthday. With all things being relative, Midoriya thought he'd had a pretty good day. He'd woken up early with enough time for a pretty good breakfast, was well rested, and didn't get caught in any incidents on his way to school. He'd successfully outran Bakugou and his lackeys and met a very friendly cat while hiding in a tree near the back corner of his elementary school's campus, a cat that was very appreciative when he offered it some shrimp from the bento his mother had made him. Then he'd managed to escape being made a fool of by the history teacher, before escaping Bakugou again and having enough time to catch a skirmish between local Musutafu hero Death Arms and a small group of bandits. Now, having finished his birthday dinner, Inko Midoriya's legendary katsudon, and his dessert, green tea mochi, yum, the boy was sitting in the living room while his mother finished washing the last of their dishes. Hero analysis for the future number 6 was in his hands. As he pulled up the nightly news, hoping to catch some hero fights to analyze, he was particularly hoping to see a broadcast about someone with a really fascinatingly unique quirk, like 13 or the newly debuted Skycrawler. As he finally found a channel displaying a hero fight, some villain with a short-range teleportation quirk against Endeavor, yuck, he noticed something drip onto his notebook. A droplet of sort of odd black fluid. Wondering if there was a leak in their apartment. Something to let his dad know about as soon as he called from California to wish Izuku a happy birthday. He looked upwards, and immediately gasped in surprise. A small orb of viscous black liquid was forming in midair in the middle of their living room, and rapidly expanding in size and turbulence. "Mom, you should probably come see this," he said, raising his voice in alarm. "One moment," Izuku Honey Inko called back, drying the last dishes. She entered the room just in time to notice the enormous orb of what looked like very thick ink directly in front of her son, right before it exploded, covering much of the room in a liquid that smelled like burnt rubber while revealing a figure inside it. The man in the orb was tall, probably just over 2 full meters in height, and impeccably dressed in a formal black business suit with a white undershirt, and no necktie. What was most concerning, aside from the fact that he had just walked into the Midoriya family's living room, was the fact that the upper half of his face was one giant open wound. The man had no nose, eyes, forehead, or hair, just a wound dripping blood all over Inko's carpet. Before the woman could act in violent self-defense and rip the heart out of his chest, he spoke in an all-too-familiar voice. "Izuku? Inko?" The green-haired woman almost felt her own heart stop as she realized this was none other than her own husband, Hisashi Midoriya. "Dad." What happened to you? Izuku shouted in shock. Can't lie my way out, the man chuckled bitterly. All Might tried to lobotomize me with his fist. What do you mean, All Might tried to lobotomize me with his fist? Inko demanded. Hisashi's injuries had by that point caught up with him enough to force him to drop to his knees. I'll contact when stable, he gasped out, before looking towards where he'd last heard his son. Happy birthday, Izuku. Love you. Then, the man was engulfed in black fluid again, disappearing as quickly as he'd arrived. Yuku dropped his notebook on the floor in stunned surprise, while his mother did the only sensible thing that can be done when your husband warps into your living room, says that he picked a fight with All Might and lost, then leaves. She fainted. 3 weeks later. So tell me the truth, Hisashi, if that even is your name, Inko said in a mildly irate tone as she sat down in the chair by her husband's bedside. The man had an ungodly number of life support devices plugged into his arms, head and throat, all of them beeping, buzzing or dripping away. Who are you really? Hisashi sighed as best he could. I knew I'd have to explain this to you one day. I just didn't think it would be so soon, he said. I did not lie about my name, it really is and always has been Hisashi Shigaraki. I was never really fond of that surname though, which is why I took your last name when we married. As you've probably figured out, I'm not a salaryman accountant working overseas for the Silverstein Bags hedge fund in San Francisco. I am, put simply, a businessman, he said. When Inko leveled a glare at him that he could practically feel, even if he couldn't see it, he withered slightly. Fine, I'm a villain. Technically the villain. Inko gasped slightly, before fixing her face with a look of determination. Define the villain. Hisashi bit his lip slightly, one of the few facial features he had left, before continuing. Have you ever heard a bedtime story about a boogeyman who can take your quirk? Inko nodded numbly. I have. But even if he was real, and not just a story to scare naughty children, wouldn't he be long dead by now? A moment later, she connected the dots. You dash. The boogeyman. I'm married to him, aren't I? Hisashi nodded as best he could. Correct. I am just over 130 years old thanks to an immortality quirk that I gathered from an associate of mine when I was around 40. I guess I was ruler of Japan's underworld, with a trans-Pacific criminal empire that had tendrils in Hong Kong, Korea, Australia, Indonesia, Chile, Mexico and the Western United States. And All Might, what did you do to provoke him? Inko pressed. It's personal for him. I can't go fully into detail, but, about 35 years ago, I killed his mentor, Hisashi said. He's been after me with what I can't describe as anything other than a murder boner since then, and this fight saw him nearly get his wish. Does he know you survived? The green-haired woman asked. I don't think so. He doesn't know that I had enough regeneration quirks to keep myself alive even after a hit like that, and when I was retreating, I used a body double quirk and caused a massive explosion to fake my own death, the ancient supervillain elaborated. Now, I just have to cover my tracks for good. Sitting up in bed, the eyeless man looked as best he could at his wife. I'm stable for now. But once I am able to move and operate again, I will begin dismantling several of my largest criminal operations. I have enough wealth squirreled for us to live off for centuries if necessary, and could probably build an unassailable fortress for us to hide in if the world figures out who I am. He said, before being cut off by his wife. Hisashi. After a few moments of silence, the man sighed. Are you mad at me? Inko cleared her throat. I'm going to be perfectly honest, Hisashi. I am furious with you. Right now. Oh, thought all for one, the Dark Emperor, Scourge of the Pacific, man of 1,000 quirks, and Grand Regent to several budding villain groups started or co-opted by his subordinates. If you weren't tied to this life support system, I would have you sleeping on the couch for the next 10 years, Inko continued, seemingly unaware of her husband's internal terror. But With that being said, I'm not entirely surprised. What? Hisashi wondered aloud, his shock genuine this time, perhaps even more so than when All Might charged him with his innards dangling out of the hole in his stomach. Look, Inko began, looking her husband right where his eyes used to be before they were surgically removed via fist. I knew from the moment I met you in that konbini that you were lying about something. Well, maybe not lying so much as telling half-truths. If I hadn't been okay with that anyway, I wouldn't have agreed to date you. I wouldn't have married you. I wouldn't have had a son with you. I wouldn't have cried on the phone with you over Izuku's diagnosis, and most of all, I wouldn't have fallen in love with you. As the mostly faceless villain gaped in shock over his wife's passionate monologue, the woman continued on anyway, a fierce look burning in her eyes. So if you think I'm leaving you, that I want a divorce, that I never want to see you again, you're dead wrong. Bending down until her face was just inches from his. Till death do us part, right? Inko Midoriya walked out of the underground hospital ward her husband was being kept in. Making her way over to the side office, she left her son in with one of his analysis notebooks and a live feed of several different hero fights. As she entered the office, Izuku turned to her. Having just finished a new entry on the edgelord hero, Odd Eye. Is Dad going to be all right? He asked. Inko smiled softly. It's going to be a very long time before he's healthy again, but he'll be all right, she said, taking a business card Hisashi had given her moments before out of her pocket. Oboro's Bakali Tavern, she wondered, flipping the card over. On the back was a number and a short note. Call this number and ask for Kurogiri, he knows the full story. Pulling her phone out, Inko dialed the number and waited for it to ring through. Oboro's Bakali Tavern, this is Oboro. How can I help you? Asked a baritone voice on the other end of the phone. Hello. My name is Inko Midoriya. I'm looking for Kurogiri, the woman said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. One moment please, the voice said, before a sound like pressurized air being released was heard over the phone. That would be me. Am I to presume that my lord has explained the situation to you fully? This time, the voice had come back slightly deeper and more distorted, almost as if it was echoing through a fog bank. That's right, Inko replied, still curious about the change in voice. I will be with you in just one moment, came the response. The phone then hung up, and before Inko could say anything more, a cloud of dark purplish mist coalesced in front of her and her son. Two yellow eyes appeared in the mist, which then took on a vaguely humanoid form. I am Kurogiri. Please, step through this portal and do not be alarmed. The elder Midoriya gulped slightly as a hole in reality opened, revealing a dimly lit bar on the other side. In one corner, a preteen with light blue hair played video games, mumbling to himself in irritation. Taking her son's hand in her own, Inko stepped forward towards an uncertain future. As soon as they had both passed through the gate, the dark mist collapsed in upon itself, leaving no trace that they had ever stood in the dimly lit underworld hospital. Chapter end notes. Welcome, one and all, to my new project, that I hopefully won't forget about and stop updating. This is Playing Both Sides, an alternate universe where our plucky protagonist is a little less plucky and a lot more disillusioned with society. As you can see, we're one chapter in and already have dad for one and elder brother Tomura, so if those aren't your jam, I don't entirely recommend this fic, though it could surprise you. Unlike literally any of my other fics, I actually have this one planned out from start to finish, with enough of a difference from canon that I truthfully don't care very much where Horikoshi takes the rest of the series, unlike with Luck of the Draw, Redesign, Rebuild, Reclaim, and all my other unpublished works. So, to recap differences thus far, Izuku knows that AFO is his dad, and is also a lot less okay with the screwed up parts of society. Inko is in the know about her husband's activities, and is still in love with him despite how pissed she is about his side hustle. Bakugou is already a pain in the ass. All Might and his allies think AFO is dead, And so do Ifo's acolytes, including Dr. Garaki. That last one is definitely not important at all. Nah, no way. Anyway, next time we'll see Izuku and Tomura meet for the first time, as our future hero. Student who moonlights as a villainous mastermind collects the first of his league's future members. Tally ho, lads and lasses. DVD 181. Chapter notes. Call me Prometheus. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. Oboro's Back Alley Tavern, 5:35 p.m. Stepping through the portal, Inko and Izuku entered a dimly light but clean tavern. In one corner of the room, a couple of rough-looking thugs sat in a booth, drinking and laughing. Another corner had a small couch, where a blue-haired preteen growled indignantly while playing an archaic beat-em-up video game. Two other thugs stood on either side of the couch, drunkenly cheering the kid on as his character executed a brutal piledriver move on a similar-looking thug on the screen. Lady Midoriya, young lord, spoke the voice Inko had heard on the phone a minute or two earlier. Turning to look behind them, the mother-son duo was met with the sight of a well-maintained oak bar with several cabinets of quality liquor behind it. Standing behind the bar was a man seemingly made from the same dark purple mist as the portal they had arrived through, wearing a fancy suit and waistcoat. "Are you Kurogiri, sir?" Izuku asked. The mist man nodded as the black fog slowly receded from around him, revealing a youthful-looking man with several nasty scars on his head and neck. "When on duty for All for One. That is my code name. However, when in public or working behind the bar, you may call me Oboro Shirakumo. It was my name before my accident," he responded. "Can I get you anything to drink?" "2 waters, please," Inko said, gesturing to the preteen gaming in the corner with the two drunks cheering him on. Her face took on a concerned expression. "Is it really all right for someone his age to be here without supervision?" "I see Shirakumo, or was it Kurogiri?" responded. "Lord All for One must not have told you about young Tomura then, and I think I understand why," gesturing at the boy, the mist man elaborated. "Tomura Shigaraki's real name is Tenko Shimura." Inko gasped. "Shimura? Did something happen to my brother?" she asked, thinking of her younger twin brother and the cold attitude he had adopted towards their mother after she placed them in foster care, something she did due to the threat posed by the very same man who was her husband now, ironically. Oboro nodded. "Your brother became abusive towards his children over any mention of heroics in his household. Tenko was presumed quirkless, but after one particularly bad day, his quirk manifested in a destructive and fatal manner." As he spoke, the preteen's game character was killed in a boss fight. While the two men drunkenly laughed, Tomura screamed in inarticulate rage and grabbed his controller tightly in one hand. The plastic device quickly crumbled into dust, spilling all over the floor. The mist man loudly sighed and opened a warp gate, producing a new controller while another warp gate vacuumed away the ashes from the floor. "Tomura Shigaraki, please remember Sensei's instructions and wear your gloves when playing your video games," he reprimanded his ward. "It's their fault. I want to destroy them," began the brunette preteen as he gestured at the two drunk thugs, before being interrupted by a green-haired motormouth. "Wow! Is that your quirk? Looks like a 5-point contact-based disintegration quirk. That has so many potential applications. You could use it in the private sector to clear construction debris and build pathways through difficult terrain or efficiently dispose of hazardous waste if Japanese quirk regulations were more lenient." Izuku began to ramble as his pencil flashed across the paper of his notebook. "But the potential as a rescue hero is amazing. You could be just like 13 and him." Tomura shouted. "Who is this brat, anyway? Another stupid hero worshipper, eh? Symptom of everything wrong with society. Why I ought to," he ranted, starting to reach towards the greenette with all 5 fingers. "Tomura Shigaraki, this child is Sensei's biological son, and this woman is his wife Kurogiri. Elaborated, gesturing at Inko. She is also your biological father's sister, and thus your aunt. The blue-haired preteen stopped reaching forward immediately, frozen stiff. My father's, he asked slowly, his hands reaching up to scratch at his neck. No, that can't be, he never said anything. His hands were stopped by two others. My brother hated our mother for putting her career before her family, Inko said, slowly lowering the boy's hands down to his sides. In a way, I understand him, but he went too far, and I can't forgive him for what he did to you, now or ever. Ruffling her nephew's hair, the brunette woman elaborated. It sounds like what you did was a pure accident, Tenko. You are no monster, but your father was. Looking up at the ceiling, Inko glared. Wherever he is, I hope he never knows peace for what he did. The brunette's breathing steadied. Opting not to dwell on his aunt for too long, Tomura turned his attention to his cousin and adopted brother. This is Sensei's son, he asked in a disappointed voice. He's so small and weak and obsessed with heroes. How did Sensei even let that happen? Izuku stopped writing and looked his cousin in the eye. It's not our grandmother's fault as a hero that my uncle treated you the way he did, and it's not my dad's fault either as a villain, he said. It's only Uncle Kotaro's fault that he was a bad dad to you. I hope my dad has been better. Tomura made a strangled sound of rage or maybe just sheer existential frustration and sat down on the couch, returning to his pre-Quirk video game. Izuku stared at him pensively, lost in thought. He's not wrong though, society really is a mess. Dad being a villain was part of it, but I think our grandma might have been somehow pressured to give up my mom and uncle to continue her career as a hero, the brunette thought, flipping to another page and noting these thoughts down. Maybe being a hero isn't the perfect pedestal I thought it was. 2 years later. Izuku Midoriya, age 10. Tenko Shimura, age 14. Izuku Midoriya's day could definitely have been going better. The green-haired child slid down a railing, banked hard right around a corner and scrambled up a fire escape to the rooftop of a flower shop, his green head of hair helping him blend in with the planter boxes around the edges of the roof. A few seconds later, the splashing sounds of footsteps in the cold rain echoed down the street as Bakugou, Yubiri and a couple of other bullies whose names he didn't know dashed into view. Where the hell did he go? Yubiri shouted, looking left and right. Hell if I know, chuckle nuts. Keep looking, ordered Bakugou as they continued down the street. Midoriya stayed under cover for another minute despite the rainy weather and grey skies, before shimmying down a drainpipe and escaping into a back alley. Stupid. Kaken. No, Bakugou, he doesn't deserve that nickname anymore. How is it my fault that I'm his favorite target just because of something I can't control? As he walked past a side alley, the sound of heavy breathing and sniffling caught his attention. Curious, the boy turned to his right to see the source of the noise, only for his eyes to widen in shock. A blonde-haired girl not much older than himself, covered in grime and streaks of blood, sat in the alleyway in a gap behind a dumpster, attempting to use a piece of cardboard from the waste bin to keep the rain off of her. Before he knew it, his feet were already moving. Hey, are you all right? He asked softly, kneeling down next to her. The girl recoiled in shock, attempting to curl further into the cardboard-covered hole behind the dumpster. Easy, I promise I won't hurt you. I'm not worried about you hurting me, the girl murmured. I'm worried that I'll hurt you. What? Why? Midoriya asked, extending his right hand towards her in what was supposed to be a calming gesture. This was the wrong thing to do, as the girl violently recoiled into the hole behind the waste bin, dropping the piece of cardboard as a shield between them. Because I'm a monster, a freak. I hurt people, she shouted, breaking down in tears. I could hurt you. Why are you being so nice to me? Isn't saving someone who needs to be saved what heroes do? Do I need more of a reason than that? the greenette asked. Silence greeted him, moving aside the cardboard he found. The girl staring at him with teary eyes sparkling with a glimmer of hope, maybe. Before he had much time to dwell on that thought, however, he heard angry shouting that was all too familiar further down the alley. God damn it, Bakugou. Midoriya thought to himself, looking around the alley and spying a stack of intact cardboard boxes. Thinking quickly, the greenette grabbed 3 empty ones, placing one over the blonde girl and then stacking the other 2 over the top of them. Shooting a text with a location off to Kurogiri, Midoriya calmed his breath and watched Bakugou and his cronies race past the alleyway, still looking for him. Damned Deku. I'll give him the beating of a lifetime when I find him, the explosive blonde shouted. Deciding he'd burn that bridge on Monday when they returned to school, the boy waited until the angry voices had retreated far into the distance before standing up and removing the boxes. Behind him, the familiar barometric change from Kurogiri's quirk swelled into existence, and he almost felt himself sagging in relief. Lifting the last box up, he found that the blonde girl had passed out at some point in the past few minutes, possibly from being emotionally overwhelmed by someone asking her if she was all right. Kurogiri, we need to get this girl out of the rain, and get me out of here before Bakugou comes back, Midoriya elaborated. The mist man nodded, gently picking up the girl and carrying her through his portal. A small card fell out of her dirty school uniform as he did, and the curious greenette picked it up to read it. Himiko Toga, huh? I get the feeling your story isn't going to be any happier than Tenko's. 1 year later. Izuku Midoriya, age 11. Tenko Shimura, age 15. Himiko Toga, age 12. The girl that Midoriya had found in that alley, Himiko Toga, turned out to indeed have a tragic backstory involving abusive parents, in her case because of her blood-based transformation quirk and her dietary need for blood. Whatever quack counselor the Togas had used clearly did not understand the ramifications of suppressing her quirk and her dietary requirements for nearly a decade, and Midoriya himself was amazed she had survived so long without consuming blood, given her body's need for the substance. This was quickly remedied when she, unofficially and probably illegally, took up residence in an upstairs room of Oboro's back alley tavern. Inko had wanted to take the girl in as a proper family member and adopt her. However, the discovery that Himiko's biological parents had paid off the school district to erase all footage of the incident that made her a criminal on her first day in middle school, her urge to consume blood had reawakened from seeing one of her classmates bloody after a fight. She stabbed him and drank his blood with a straw while he was unconscious, and Inko's time commitments as a de facto single parent and full-time doctor made it unfeasible. Himiko had quickly proven that she fit in well with both Tenko, who was slowly becoming a less unstable and more well-adjusted teenager, and Izuku, and was academically at the same level as the former due to his need to catch up from his period of childhood instability. 2. Tenko's dismay and Izuku's amusement, she also proved to be very good at fighting games, causing the Decay user to rage quit several times while playing against her. She also seemed more naturally inclined towards villainy than Izuku, putting her in close alignment with Tenko. As a prospective villain group, the trio, plus Kurogiri by default, decided to call themselves the League of Villains and ultimately decided they needed to start recruiting members. This leads us to the present day, where the 3 of them are now conducting their first interview with a potential member, forwarded their direction by the info broker sleazy bastard Okuta Jiran Kajero. Jiran initially tried to charge the 3 teens and preteens a high price for his services, but curiously backed off the second that Izuku mentioned that he didn't like this deal and was going to call his mother. Odd. So, you're O twice, right? Himiko asked the man sitting across the booth from them. That's my name. Don't wear it out, the masked man replied cheerfully, before his voice took on a completely different tone. Who the hell is twice? You little runts have the wrong guy. Whatever you say, Mr. Twice, Tenko said, a cheeky grin on his face. Thank you. Watch your tone, you little bastard. Once again, the man's personality swung like a pendulum in a matter of moments. The three interviewers, dressed in dark suits and ties, looked at one another quizzically. Luckily, they had already researched the man in front of them, so Izuku knew how to approach the situation. Twice. Quirk, double, allows you to duplicate yourself or others provided that you have basic dimensional measurements on hand for them. Wanted for 24 cases of armed robbery, destruction of public property and disturbing the peace. Real name, Jin Bubagaiwara dash. The greenette smirked as the masked man suddenly shot to his feet in alarm, gripping his head with both hands. I'm not Jin. Jin tried to kill us, the man ranted in an agitated voice, his voice swinging back and forth as his personalities met in agreement on something. Where is he? We'll kill him before he can kill us. Why would Jin kill you? Himiko asked the man, leaving through some of the papers on the table. Jin created us, but we tried to kill Jin. We know we failed because if Jin died, so would we, Twice said in the odd fusion voice. Jin would want revenge on us for being just a clone. Mr. Twice, how much damage can one of your doubles take before dissolving back into mud? The greenette queried, passing a note to Tenko. The brunette teen read the note, made eye contact with the other and nodded quickly as he got up from the table. About as much damage as a broken bone. More than that causes us to disintegrate, came the masked man's response, still caught in his mental breakdown. Izuku smiled warmly and nodded. Good to know. Tenko, if you would. Twice didn't have enough time to react before he found his right hand in the firm grip of Tenko Shimura. Prying up the hand's middle finger, the brunette nodded before suddenly pulling it backwards with a loud snap. The masked man screamed in pain, shock and horror. It hurts. It hurts so damned much, he shouted, before the situation caught up with him. It hurts, but I'm not dissolving. Jin began to laugh. It really was true. I'm really the real me. Tears streamed down from his eyes, but the expression on his face was anything but sad. So how does it feel, Jin Bubagaiwara, to know that you're really you? That you're not a clone or an imposter or a double, but the real deal down to the core? Izuku asked. The greenette was surprised when he found himself suddenly embraced from across the table by the other man, who removed his mask to reveal an average-looking blonde male in his early 30s with a large scar bisecting his forehead vertically. Knowing I'm really me feels so good, Jin shouted, his voice slowly losing the unnerving two-toned harmony it has previously and becoming more of a normal tone. I'm in your debt. For life, boss. With that, the man went back to sniffling and crying joyfully on the preteen's shoulders. Izuku turned as best he could to his partners in eventual crime and shrugged. Our annual recruitment drive is a success, I guess, he said hesitantly. Tenko laughed. Given that he's treating you like the second coming of Amaterasu right now, I think I guess is an understatement, the brunette said. Himiko rolled her eyes and kicked him in the shin over that comment, but it was more of a good-natured love tap than anything malicious. Would you like us to find a healer to get your finger fixed? The blonde girl asked. I'm pretty sure Hisashi-san is probably capable of healing that up with no scarring. Jin Bubagaiwara, the newest member of the League of Villains, straightened up and bowed as he held his damaged right hand out. No need, I just need it splintered and iced and I will be fine in 2 weeks. I want to keep this scar on my hand as a symbol of my loyalty, he said, looking at the swollen and crooked purple appendage with an expression of nigh reverence. Izuku sided Tenko and Himiko, shrugged in confusion and turned back to his new recruit. Welcome to the League of Villains then, Jin Bubagaiwara. We can provide you with food, housing, a day job here at the bar to cover up involvement in any illegal activities, and most of all, a purpose. A purpose? The older blonde man asked curiously. The greenette nodded, a determined expression steeled on his face. To reform society, by any means necessary, whatever the cost and no matter how much blood we must spill. "Are you up to the task?" he asked. Jin nodded vigorously. "I would be honored to join you, Mr. Midoriya." Izuku laughed. "Please, Mr. Midoriya is my father. Call me Izuku when we're not on duty. As for when we're on duty, you may address me as Prometheus." Chapter end notes. Incredible. 1 month later, despite my promises, I can now present all of you with Chapter 2 of Playing Both Sides. Just to recap where we're at, Kurogiri remembers his past life as Shirakumo and has semi-reconciled his two identities with each other. There will be differences between the two personalities. However, off-duty as Shirakumo the bartender, he'll be more happy-go-lucky and joking. Meanwhile, when on duty as Kurogiri, he'll be more formal and no-nonsense. Tenko has been de facto adopted by Inko as a maternal figure, despite being his biological aunt, but Kurogiri is still his caretaker. However, with actual friends, stabilizing parental influences, and Hisashi trying to set him up to become a better man. Instead of the most hate-filled sack of hatred possible, he'll be much less of a psycho than he was in canon. Himiko's tragic backstory happened at the start of middle school in this timeline, not her graduation from it. As a result, she is saved by young Izuku and becomes a friend. And eventually maybe something more, for him and an annoying sister figure best friend for life to Tenko. Twice got a very raw deal in canon, so I'm trying to give him a better possible life and purpose in this timeline. He's also going to be mostly cured of his identity disorder. Mostly because I very rapidly got tired of formatting his identity swings in just this introduction scene. Having to do this for the next 98-ish chapters sounds like actual torture. Next chapter is the final one in the 3-part introduction mini-arc. We'll be meeting a certain adorable unicorn child and a damned murder toucan man and getting a massive lore information dump from Hisashi before entering the second arc of the series, the Yakuza Extermination Arc. Until later, friends. DVD 181. Chapter notes. Pain in her eyes. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. A few months after Twice recruitment into the league. There may have once been a time when Eri was happy. The small child isn't certain of this assertion, but she has to imagine that her life was better before her Quirk curse killed her father and made her mother. That woman abandon her to that monster. Overhaul. A few days ago, Rapper had snuck her into the upper courtyard of the manor. He was always the nicest of Chisaki's men, and let her see the sky, the sun, and the life outside the underground. Looking at how the birds and butterflies soared, uncaring, through the air, it made the child's heart stir with an intense desire to finally be free, a thought she did not let go. Even as Chisaki drained her veins dry and then reassembled her later that day. So now she ran. Eri ran, knowing that if the caretaker she had given the slip managed to catch her again, there was likely no escape from the compound ever again. Down the alleyway, past the garbage cans, around a stray cat and towards the nice-looking lady and her son on the street. Oof. Izuku groaned as the white-haired child with one horn impacted his leg, knocking him to the ground. Oh dear, are you all right? Inko asked, crouching down next to her son and the small child, who had run into him. That goes for you too, young lady. The brunette woman's eyes narrowed as she noticed the bandages on the child's arms and legs, and the dirt on her dress. This reeks of abuse in so many ways. Izuku, meanwhile, studied the child in front of him. Like his mother, he noticed her dirty clothes and the bandages on his arms, but he had an extra depth of perception that his mother did not. Maybe it was the fact that he was actually touching the girl, or maybe it was just his natural analytical talents, but the 14-year-old also noticed her thin, frail physique. She's malnourished and shows signs of neglect, if not outright abuse. Then the girl looked up at him, and Izuku simply froze. Her two eyes, red like blood-red rubies, boiled with pain. This child, the teen thought. She's definitely suffered at least as much as Himiko, possibly as much as Tenko has. She can't be older than 4, what kind of monster could inflict this much pain on a child so young for it to be seen in her eyes? Eri. The small child froze in sheer terror at the deep, commanding baritone voice that spoke her name. Turning around slowly, Eri's worst fears were realized as she saw a golden-eyed man standing at the other end of the alley, a plague mask on his face and white gloves on his hands. This was Chisaki, the young master of the Shigaraki and source of her pain. The man known as Overhaul. Please do excuse my daughter, she has an awful tendency of running away, the man said, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. Chisaki kept his bloodlust well contained, but what little leaked out was enough to make the hair on both Midoriya's necks stand on end. This guy is bad news, Izuku thought, while Inko's palms glowed slightly as she established telekinetic grips on several objects in the alley. Do you have any idea why that might be? The teenager challenged the man against his better judgment, keeping one hand on the child's shoulder to try to reassure her. We'd better be ready to run at a moment's notice. Overhaul sighed. It's a funny and kind of sad story, really, but also an embarrassing one. I'd rather not tell it in public view. Would you mind coming back here so that I may tell you? Without fear of eavesdropping? While saying this, the man took a step forward and began to slide off one glove. Before he could make another move or the Midoriyas could attempt to fight or escape, Eri let go of Izuku and ran back to Overhaul's side. I'm sorry, father, she said, attempting to calm the man slightly and divert his anger away from the mother-son pair at the mouth of the alleyway. Chisaki inhaled deeply, his fury visible from the clenching of his fists and stiffening of his body, but after a few moments he relaxed slightly. Very well, Eri, we are leaving, he said, turning to walk away. While doing so, he briefly looked back at Inko and Izuku. And thank you for helping me find her, I'm very appreciative. Later, while strapped to the chair in Overhaul's laboratory, feeling the life drain out of her as he extracted all of her blood yet again, the white-haired unicorn child wondered if she would ever see the two people who had been so nice to her and tried to protect her from Overhaul again. A plague doctor mask. All for one asked, sitting on his throne while hooked up to his life support equipment. Those are a hallmark of the Shigaraki, a Yakuza family based in the Western Tokyo Metro. I do remember seeing their boss, Kosuke Murasaki, shortly before my fight with All Might. At the time, his second in command was a young man with golden eyes named Chisaki. It sounds like he may have been the man you encountered. Chisaki, Izuku murmured. A printer in the corner of the room came to life as Hisashi activated a technopathic quirk, using it to print all the information he had on the man and his organization. The first page that printed depicted the same golden-eyed man that Inko and Izuku had encountered earlier that day. That's him. Everything about him and that girl screamed bad news. A child. Fascinating, Hisashi said. I remember during my last meeting with Murasaki that he mentioned his daughter and son-in-law were expecting soon. I wonder if that girl was the same child they were expecting at the time. However, too much is amiss to suggest that Chisaki is the girl's actual father, which suggests that both Murasaki and his daughter's family may not be in the picture anymore. There was so much pain in her eyes. Whatever is going on with her, I can tell that she's got at least as tragic a backstory as Himiko, if not Tenko, the teenager replied, leafing through Chisaki's file. I'm pretty sure this man is abusing her somehow. Then what are you going to do about it? Huh? Izuku asked, turning to the blind man in the back of the room. You heard me. I know you desire to become a hero, despite me being literally the greatest villain in Japanese history. This seems like a good trial run of morally grey heroism, dipping slightly into villainy, Hisashi responded. You're so much like your uncle that it's terrifying. But you've got much more common sense and think more critically than he did. Setting down the papers, Izuku straightened up and turned to his father. You've talked about my long-dead uncle more than a few times and have mentioned something called 1-4. All in the past. I'm tired, Dad, I want the truth out of you. And when I say the truth, I mean the whole truth, the teen said, determination shining in his eyes. Hisashi grimaced slightly and was silent for a few moments before sighing deeply. Fine. But you'll want to pull up a chair for this, because it's not a short or fun story at all. And so the great demon lord all for one began to tell his story. I was born in the year 2001 here in Shizuoka Prefecture. My parents were Hirona Suzumabachi, heiress to a noble estate in Hokkaido, and Tomura Shigaraki, heir to one of the few zaibatsus of its size to have survived the 1990s economic recession. It was an arranged marriage by their parents, and not one that either of them agreed with. That's never a good start to a story. No, it is not. Anyway, I was born with white hair and red eyes, same as I had until that blonde gibbon surgically removed them with his fist. I was assumed to be an albino and was looked at oddly, but nobody really suspected anything was genetically amiss until my brother Yoichi was born 3 years later with white hair and green eyes, a combination unheard of at the time. Oh, they were signs that you would both go on to develop quirks in the future. That's correct, but at the time nobody knew what a quirk even was, because they'd never been seen before. In order to not be perceived as freaks, Yoichi was forced to have his hair dyed, and both of us were pretty much isolated within our mother's large estate. Homeschooled out of the public eye. In order to keep from dying of boredom, we turned to superhero comics we'd secretly ordered online and hidden from our parents. Our favorite was Captain Hero, but while he liked the main character for his sense of justice and self-sacrifice, I preferred the main villain for his gritty realism and willingness to get his hands dirty to achieve his goals. That sounds awfully familiar. I may have gone too far in emulating the Demon King in achieving my goals. Right as all might was shearing my face off, I came to the all-too-late conclusion that I was just an ascended Chunibya who had taken that shtick too far. Awkward but correct. Because of our parents' hatred for each other, we became their proxies in their little war against each other. Yoichi was my mother's favorite child, so she locked him in the house and kept him from developing normally. This decision affected his physical development and eventually led to him developing a chronic autoimmune disease. I was my father's proxy, so he'd push me to excel until I broke and then made me keep going. Pretty much the only semblance of normalcy your uncle and I had was sneaking into each other's living quarters to read comics. I don't like where this story is going. It gets far worse than abusive parents. Around 2020, the glowing baby was born in China. And society went topsy-turvy. It was thought that a global pandemic at the time was forcibly evolving the children of its survivors to develop quirks, but Dr. Garaki, whose real name is actually Kyuichi Shigaraki and is my cousin on my father's side, thinks they were about to develop naturally anyway, as nobody in our family had the virus but my cousin, your uncle. And I all developed quirks anyway. Garaki is your cousin? Hard to believe, I know. He couldn't handle more than a single copy of his own immortality. Quirk, while I have 3 preventing me from aging as badly as he did. I had just finished college and was trying to get your uncle out of that household when society came unglued. And the Sino-American War started flying over our heads, with the quirks being an unexpected addition that made a pear-shaped situation go completely plum-shaped. In the chaos, Japanese society started to crumble, and so I started amassing influence as a self-defense measure. Unfortunately, I LARP'd a little too convincingly as a demon king, and your uncle started a rebellion against me in order to keep the old government afloat, which eventually went down in flames anyway when the People's Republic of China nuked the national diet. Wait, it was all a big misunderstanding? It was at first. However, after my brother died and passed on the transferable quirk I didn't know he had, taking the stockpile Quirk I'd given him with it, I kind of went mad. Even after the world stopped being at war with itself and Japanese society stabilized, I continued to grow my criminal empire while hunting down and murdering all of my brother's successors, in pursuit of his quirk, since it was the only memento I had of him. This lasted until all might became the first hero or villain to nearly kill me in my 130 years of living, and now, here I am, stuck to this chair. You're telling me that most of modern hero society in Japan and the modern villain scene all exist because my grandparents were terrible at parenting at the most inopportune time in human history? Correct. Izuku blinked a few times. That's pretty bad. Now what? Hisashi sighed. While All Might demolished and imprisoned a lot of my lieutenants in Tartarus, my abrupt disappearance and presumed death has caused a power vacuum that has been filled by my remaining lieutenants and allies and some new faces. Additionally, the Heroic Public Safety Commission's current administration appears to be trying to slowly transform Japanese society into a totalitarian quirkist dictatorship over the next few generations. I feel this is my mess that I have to clean up, but there is little I can do from this chair. Son, do you think you can forego heroics in favor of becoming the Demon King? The underworld needs to bring back stability. Izuku shook his head. I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't give up on my dream, even with no quirk, but I can also take your goals on as well. If Hisashi still had eyes, they'd have opened wide in surprise. Both, he asked. You want to pursue heroics and villainy? The Greenette nodded. It's as you said. The Japanese underworld needs a strong leader to purge the most violent and anarchistic influences in it, while hero society needs a symbol of reform to get rid of the corruption in its midst while thwarting the HPSC's authoritarian tendencies. If I can be both the number one hero and the number one villain, I'll be able to make both dreams a reality and bring stability to society while staving off anarchy, stagnation and tyranny alike. As he took his son's words in, a grin slowly grew on what remained of Hisashi's face. Magnificent, he murmured. It's like you've got all my best traits and all my brother's best traits with your mother's common sense and stubbornness. I will support you in all your endeavors in both heroics and villainy, son. Izuku beamed at his father. Thank you. Now, about the Hasaikai. Hisashi nodded. The girl, yes, will want to rescue her from that situation immediately. If she's being experimented on like that, she undoubtedly has an interesting quirk as well. Speaking of quirks, are there any in particular from my collection that you'd like? Fire, breath, air cannon, heavy payload, color change. The Greenette shook his head. I want to treat this like a heist and an espionage mission, so having a quirk might color my view of my capabilities as a frontline combatant instead of a mission leader and planner. I do not want a quirk at this time, but I will consider it in the future when I start preparing to go to UA High. Splendid, Hisashi responded. I recommend that you begin preparing for your operation now. I will have full access to all my archives for you by the end of the day. In the meantime, you should ask your mother to help find you and your new League of Villains someone to train for combat with. As Kurogiri opened a portal at the far end of the room, the Greenette waved goodbye to his father, returning to the bar to begin planning for his future as a villain leader. While he had initially been confused about what his father meant by asking his mother to assist in combat training for the League, Inko was more than amenable towards Izuku's request when he asked her. Now he, Tenko and Himiko were standing in a dojo that Kurogiri had warped them to. Looking out the window on one side, the Greenette teen could tell the dojo was in a loft overlooking the inside of an old warehouse. I wonder who Auntie was able to set us up with as an instructor, Tenko pondered, playing some mobile game on his phone as he sat on one side of the room. Ooh, I know, Himiko said, all hyped up. She probably was able to get in. Contact with someone really cool in the underground, like the hero killer. Learning from him would be amazing, the blonde teen gushed. I don't know about that one. I think she probably just knows someone really good with martial arts, the greenette responded, completing his latest set of analysis notes on Overhaul's Quirk. One way or the other, I hope Jin is having a good time right now. Meanwhile, somewhere in Tokyo, Jin Bubagaiwara wandered down a street, a surgical mask covering his face to help him avoid detection and ensure that he remained mentally stable. While he'd made significant progress on a psychological level since joining the League, he still wasn't quite back together, and wanted to make sure that he didn't have an episode while carrying out his important task. After all, Prometheus had sent him on the streets with the goal of finding the Shy Hasaikai's headquarters, which was why he had several dozen clones of himself walking, bicycling or taking taxicabs across the region looking for men in bird masks. It was like a giant manhunt. And boy, was it fun. Abandoned warehouse dojo. He's probably fine right now, Himiko said. Do you also hear those footsteps? Sure enough, the sound of footsteps came from a nearby corridor, signaling the arrival of their combat instructor. The three teenagers looked expectantly towards the doorway, only to be caught completely off guard by the new arrival. Standing in the dojo, wearing a slightly loose-fitting green sweatshirt with elbow pads and a ballistic vest over it, a pair of black cargo pants, a set of dark combat boots and a black domino mask, the trio were greeted by the sight of Inko Midoriya. Mom! Izuku exclaimed in surprise, jumping back slightly. Hey auntie! Tenko yelped, jumping to his feet and fumbling his phone back into his pants pocket. "Aye, Inko?" Himiko asked. The green-haired woman smiled. "Good afternoon, class," she greeted. "I'm glad to see you. All here right on time. Who's ready to get started on close-quarters combat training?" Izuku and Tenko both let their expressions fade from confusion into enthusiasm, while Himiko jumped up and down. "We are. Who do you have teaching us? Mr. Compress? The hero killer?" Inko laughed. "Don't be silly, Himiko. I wouldn't let anyone as pedestrian as them face you," she said. "I'll be training you myself." Just like that, the enthusiasm drained from all three teens, replaced by a look of abject confusion. "You'll be training us, Mom?" Izuku asked in surprise. "Are you sure you're up for that?" Himiko added. Tenko tapped both his compatriots on the shoulder. "I don't mean to alarm you guys, but I think I hear boss music," the blue-haired teenager said, a petrified look on his face as he stared at their teacher. "Lesson 1 starts now," the green-haired woman said cheerfully, before an intense look appeared on her face. "Your goal is to survive the next 5 minutes. Good luck." Meanwhile, in Tokyo. "God damn, it's hot." Jin grumbled to himself, an ice pop in his hand. The blonde-haired man continued to march down the side streets of the Tokyo metro, combing the city in a grid pattern with his doubles to ensure he didn't miss the Hasaikai's hideout. A few young children ran past him on the street, laughing and shouting silly names at each other. The scarred man laughed to himself slightly, then looked up to the sky. "I hope those kids are having fun too right now." At the warehouse dojo, Izuku groaned in pain, lifting himself off the mat slowly in the hopes of avoiding his mother's attention. He staggered to his feet just in time to watch Tenko charge at Inko with all 5 fingers uncovered and extended, only for her to gracefully sidestep the teen's charge, grab him by the shirt and belt, and throw him head over heels across the room into a pile of cardboard boxes. A few moments later, decay spread through the boxes and caused them to crumble, revealing the dazed teen lying in a heap half-conscious on the floor. Himiko let out a war cry and jumped towards their foe from behind, bringing a knife down over her head in a stabbing attempt. Inko responded by pivoting around, disarming the blonde teen with a graceful kick, and then channeling her quirk into a devastating palm strike that launched the girl back several meters. The green-haired boy shivered as his mother turned to look at him with a look that promised pain. Well then, Izuku, are you going to show me what you've got? Come to mommy. Dear, she said, her palms glowing slightly. Izuku dashed backwards in an attempt to retreat, only to feel a sudden tug on his t-shirt, labeled with the word pants, of course, as Inko used her quirk to pull her son towards her rapidly. The last thing the teenager could think before his face collided with his mother's fist. Pretty much summed the situation up. Well, fuck. Chapter end notes. A new chapter already? Fun fact, it took 2 weeks to write the first 3 paragraphs of this chapter, and 2 hours to write everything else. My commitment and focus is spotty and unpredictable on the best of days, friends. This chapter's implications. The Midoriyas, and by extension the League, are now aware of Overhaul and the Hisaki's operations and Eri's existence. This brings us directly into the next story arc. Starting next chapter, I will officially welcome you all to the Yakuza extermination arc. All for One's backstory and Izuku's goals are both explained in this chapter. To summarize, Hisashi and Yoichi are products of a really, really shitty arranged marriage, and were weaponized against each other by their parents in a demented proxy war. This turned them both into Chunibyo Lapis who took things way too far and ended up shaping Japan's post-Quirk society as a result. Inko Midoriya is a goddamn badass. This will be explained in detail in the future, not gonna spoil it for y'all, but the backstory for her involves Mitsuki and Masaru Bakugou, Okuta Kajero and a group called the Shin Bakuhatsu Kai, but that's a story for another time. Next chapter, Phase 1 of the Yakuza extermination operation will begin. We're gonna be practicing espionage and recruiting muscle for help, so don't miss it. This fic now has a channel in the Jaded Discord server, https://discord, gg/gbfkjfc9gk. Chapter notes. Recruitment drive. See the end of the chapter for notes. Oboro's Back Alley Tavern. Welcome back to our humble establishment, Jiran Midoriya said with a half-sincere smile, as he sat down across the table from the sleazy info broker and underground smuggler. What brings you here today, looking for me specifically? The silver-haired man chuckled. Midoriya, my man, I've heard rumors that you're planning something big for your underground debut as a villain. Now, as an info broker, I don't like being left in the dark. Sighing and dropping his joking tone, the man's face turned serious. Tell me what you're planning, kid, and I'll see what I can do to help you. And what if I refuse? Why should I trust you? Midoriya retorted, taking a sip from his glass of cola. Jiran grimaced slightly. Look, kid, I'm too afraid of your parents to backstab you for any reason. If I know the kind of job you're planning, I can track people and gear down to help you. Pausing for a moment, the man studied the brunette teen's face and noticed a large bruise on one side of his jaw. I'm going to guess you've recently learned why people are afraid of your mother. Midoriya winced. I don't know the details of why or who she is to inspire such fear, but I can tell that it's for good reason. Mom hits like a truck and moves like a cat, he groaned, rubbing his sore cheek. The silver-haired man chuckled. Oh, you'll find out sooner or later, and boy, you're going to be shocked when you find out, he said. But back to business. What's the plan, kid? We're planning a raid of the Shai Hisaiki's headquarters, Midoriya responded, Jiran's eyes widening as he took in the implications of an upstart villain group, even one backed by the symbol of evil, raiding as well-established a Yakuza group as the Hisaikai. We need all the data you have on the Hisaikai's heavy hitters and key members, a bunch of low to mid-tier thugs to act as a diversion, and some mid to upper-tier thieves to help us break in and out in the first place. Okuta Kajero's jaw dropped slightly. Well, aren't you an ambitious one? Give me 48 hours. And I can get you any data you don't already have on Kai Chisaki and his goon squad and find you some dumb muscle to distract him. As for your thieves, I know just who you need to call. Reaching into his pocket, Jiran withdrew a card with a phone number and nothing else written on it. Calling this number and saying the password "The spirit of Arsene lives again" will get you directly in contact with Mr. Compress, leader of the Peerless Legacy. It was Midoriya's turn now to be somewhat awed. The Peerless Legacy was a group of around 100 self-styled Robin Hoods operating semi-independently across the country. Their leader, Mr. Compress, had pulled off a daring heist of the HPSC's headquarters at Paragon Plaza with the aid of some of his fellow thieves, earning him a S-rank designation as an official supervillain. His great-grandfather, the peerless thief OG Harima, was the namesake of the organization as a whole. "What's your price for all this?" The Greenette decided to ask the most important question so far, since he didn't want to make his plans rely on resources he couldn't afford to pay Jiran for. "Aside from keeping your parents off my back, I want a 20% cut of whatever monetary assets your team drains from the Hasaikai's accounts," Jiran said, putting out his cigarette. They're one of the longest operating Yakuza clans left in Japan, so they're sure to have a lot of money being laundered through various establishments. "I want some of that. It'll help me afford to stay in this business a little longer." Midoriya held his hand out for a handshake. "Consider it a deal, Mr. Kajero. 20% of the Hasaikai's ill-gotten gains in exchange for information, some hired muscle, and the Peerless Legacy's aid." Jiran nodded and stood to shake the Greenette teen's hand, before wandering back out of Oboro's back alley tavern to get to work for his latest client. "A dingy alley somewhere." "Ah!" screamed the generic Yakuza henchman in a plague mask as a naked teenage girl suddenly leapt out of nowhere onto his back and bit into his neck while gripping him in a sleeper hold. The weight on his back grew heavier as some sort of mud formed around her, slowly reshaping itself into his own physical form, clothing and all. For her part, Himiko Toga didn't let go and stop drinking the man's blood until he was firmly down for the count, before dragging him into a nearby warehouse and tossing him through one of Kurogiri's gates. Walking back out onto the street, the girl disguised as a man hurried to catch up with the man's partner. "Nobuhiko? Where the hell did you go, man?" asked the other bird-masked. "Yakuza. Sorry, Kawamura, I was checking that alley for trouble after hearing a disturbance. The boss wouldn't want vigilantes or other Yakuza intruding on his turf, right?" The lie slipped off of her tongue as easily as breathing. "I guess so," Kawamura relented. "Just don't sneak off like that again without telling me." "Okay." The man relaxed when the disguised girl nodded in concurrence as they continued back to the Hasaikai's compound. Jin had located it a week earlier on his foot patrol and relayed the data back to the League. Izuku had then studied the clan's patrol routes via the security cameras he and Kurogiri had secretly installed in the neighborhood, and found one that went right past a warehouse owned by one of All for One's shell companies. The chosen target, Himiko, had disguised herself as was Nobuhiko Akaza, a fourth-year member of the Shy Hasaikai who was reasonably well trusted by Overhaul and his top brass. Akaza also had another advantage to stealing his identity: he was quirkless, which meant Himiko wouldn't have to worry about blowing her cover by being unable to use his quirk. Her and Akaza's partner, Michiro Kawamura, re-entered the Hasaikai's compound and descended an elevator to one of the lower levels. Saluting as they passed an enormous man with red hair and a plague mask covering his entire head, the duo continued down a corridor. "Where are you headed next?" Himiko asked her partner. Kawamura sighed. "I'm off to play pack mule in the freight area. We just finished another big batch of black gold and are gonna be shipping it off to our clients in Hokkaido." "How about you?" Akaza laughed. "I'm stuck on desk jockey duty. I'll be answering emails, checking security cameras, all that boring stuff. Still, I guess it has to be done. Even Mimic can't stand to be doing that all the time." The two Yakuza parted ways, with the disguised Himiko continuing down to the IT department in the compound's computer room. After finding Akaza's cubicle, the girl logged into his desktop while downing one of the man's cherry sodas. Scrolling through the man's junk mail folder, she eventually found her objective, an email titled Find Hot Singles in Your Area Now from the email address dustamigi@a41.co.jp. Clicking the link, the girl took another sip of cherry soda while watching Tenko's malware link establish a backdoor connection between his gaming PC and the Hisaiki's computer mainframe. We're in, Himiko thought, finishing the beverage. From there on, the disguised girl spent the rest of her shift poring over various bits of intel from the Hisaiki's system. The blueprints for the building revealed that the compound was constructed in 2007 by a company called Majima Construction and had 5 levels, 2 above ground and 3 underground. The top 2 levels were residential, although most of the Hisaikai were only permitted to enter and live on the lower one. Overhaul, his lieutenants and the 8 bullets lived on the upper one. The first underground level, where the computer room was located, was where most of the basic criminal work the Hisaikai did was coordinated, from money laundering, weapons smuggling, racketeering, etc. The one below that was the laboratory where their various drugs, mostly trigger, were produced and stored, as well as where the cargo elevator up to their loading dock was located. The bottommost one, well, Himiko had no idea, because she wasn't even allowed to access the cameras down there. Akaza's security clearance was red, which authorized him to access the 3 middle levels, but not the topmost or bottommost ones. The top floor was crimson clearance, which meant that the 8 bullets and Overhaul's lieutenants could access it, while the bottommost was violet. Only Overhaul, Chronostasis and Mimic were allowed down there. That must be where the girl is being held. After her shift ended, the girl returned to Akaza's quarters on the ground floor of the Hisaikai compound. Stepping into the room, the girl waited a few minutes to make sure she wouldn't be interrupted and discovered before shooting a text off to Kurogiri. A few seconds later, the real Akaza's body landed on his futon with an unceremonious thump, while Himiko took the opportunity to leap through the warp gate with just a few minutes of transformation time left. Intelligence gathered. With the backdoor established, Tenko could now access all the Hisaikai's shipment information, electricity use data, security footage and banking info. Now, all that remained was to start poking the bear until he responded. Taking a seat at the same booth that he had negotiated with Jiran at a week earlier, Midoriya looked at the latest guest to visit Oboro's back alley tavern. Mr. Sako, I presume? Sitting across from him, a brown-haired man with blue eyes who appeared to be in his early 30s laughed slightly. Please, Mr. Sako was my father. Call me Atsuhiro. Or, if we're on duty, just Compress is fine, he said. This was the man himself, Mr. Compress, leader of the peerless legacy band of phantom thieves. Very well then, Compress, Midoriya replied. To get right to the point, I'd like to hire some of Peerless Legacy's members for a heist/raid of a Yakuza clan's compound. I already owe Jiran 20% of the Shy Hisaikai's assets, but I'd be happy to pay you double that. And throw in some select valuables taken from the compound. The operation will take up to 2 weeks and begin tomorrow morning. Your terms are almost agreeable, Prometheus Compress replied. But I understand you have a very valuable asset in your hands, one that I'd like to borrow if you wish to use my own human assets. And pray tell, what might that be? The green-haired teen asked, quirking an eyebrow. Sako smiled slightly. I understand that a man formerly known as Twice entered your employ within the last 6 months. His quirk would be a valuable asset for another job that I've been hired to do at about the same time. Jin is a valuable member of the league, but he's not cheap. You'll get 30% plus him, Midoriya said. Compress shook his head. 40% and Twice, or no deal. My final offer is 35 and Twice, take it or leave it, the greenette replied. Your bargaining skills need work, but I have a soft spot for young villains like you after my own heart. 35% and the services of Jin Bubaigawara in exchange for 3 members of Peerless Legacy. It's been a pleasure doing business with you, Compress said, finally. Agreeing to Midoriya's terms. Reaching into his pocket, the man produced a small blue marble, which he then turned into a cell phone. After a few seconds of tapping on the phone, Compress looked back to Midoriya. I've sent you the details on the specialties of the 3 PL members I'll be lending to you. Use them in your plans as you wish, just make sure they all come back alive. You have a deal, Mr. Compress. I look forward to future collaborations between our organizations, Midoriya replied, shaking the taller man's hand. As Compress left the bar, a small smile graced his face under his mask. You're an interesting one, Prometheus. I look forward to seeing just how far you'll go from here. Who knows, maybe I'll work for you, instead of just with you, someday in the future. Jiran, who the hell are these people? Midoriya stared at the assortment of bizarre-looking thugs that the info broker and underworld recruiter had brought with him to Kurogiri's bar. Why, they're the future of the League of Villains, of course, Jiran replied, selling the group as best he could. Go ahead and introduce yourselves to the boss man, boys. The group of similarly dressed hoodlums on the left consisted of 4 men wearing dark pants, blue jackets, and horned masks. Cider House, at your service, the one in the center saluted. We're generally upstanding citizens most of the time, but nobody's self-control is perfect. During the holiday season, we're small-time pickpockets, but if you're giving us a chance to fuck things up for other villains without worrying about the cops, we're all on board. Interesting. What can you do? Midoriya asked, slipping fully into his Prometheus persona. One of the thugs spoke up. The boss can control seltzer water at will, I can make myself. And others within 10 meters of me balance perfectly. Natsu over there can react slightly faster than the average person, and Cola behind me can create a disorienting gas. Not bad, not bad. I look forward to seeing you 4 in action, Prometheus responded. You, in the middle, what can you do? The unassuming salaryman in the center raised one arm, which dissolved into a long tendril of foul-smelling green liquid. My name is Suega Dorome, and my quirk is Saw Sludge. I'm an unemployed accountant by trade, and my quirk allows me to transform my entire body into a viscous liquid impervious to most blunt attacks. I can also absorb mud, water, and decaying organic matter to increase my size and strength. Growing up with a quirk like that cannot be an easy experience, the villain leader noted. And the other man sighed in confirmation of his point. I think you can do some good work for us. You 4, it's your turn. The 4 really odd-looking men on the other side grinned. I'm red. I've got a strength quirk, said the blonde man in a white tank top. Blue. I have a speed quirk, added a man in a grey turtleneck with bat-like ears on his head. I go by green, and I am basically a human GPS, said the red-haired man with a green mask on his face. And I'm yellow. I've got a pig mutation quirk that improves my physical stats and gives me a good sense of smell, added the unusual-looking man with a yellow spike on the nose of his mask. And together, we are Team Reservoir Dogs. Impressive. Very nice, Midoriya said, taking in their hammy personalities. Aside from your quirks, do any of you have other assets you bring to the table? We have a truck, Green said, raising his hand. Because of my quirk, I'm pretty much a perfect getaway driver. The green-haired teen let a smile cross his face. Magnificent. I look forward to watching you all become a major thorn in the Hisaikai's side. 2 weeks later. Friends, thank you all for being here, Midoriya addressed Oboro's back alley tavern, receiving a chorus of rowdy cheers in response. The bar had officially closed that day for a private party, which wasn't technically wrong. We are gathered here this afternoon because, after 2 weeks of preparation, and by preparation, I mean fantastic work on the part of our friend Cider House, Mr. Sludge and Team Reservoir Dogs once again, rowdy cheers came from the men in question. We are finally ready to initiate the main phase of our operation. From his seat at the bar, Tenko used a remote to turn on the TV in the corner, showing a map of the Tokyo Metro with a blinking red dot moving slowly across it. Right now, Overhaul is on his way to personally stake out one of his trigger shipments in Narahata Cider House. Mr. Sludge and Reservoir Dogs will depart momentarily to beat him there and begin attacking the shipment before he arrives, the blue-haired teen said, taking over from his adoptive brother. Kurogiri will send you and your truck there. You are to distract him and the backup he took with him. Switching over to a PowerPoint deck, the Decay user continued his pitch as images of 6 men appeared on the screen. Overhaul took his trusted Lieutenant Harry Kurono, and half of the 8 bullets Rikia Katsuki, Yu Hojo, Toya Setsuno and Soromitsu Tabe with him. We do not expect you to engage them in combat, instead, distract them with a car chase. For as long as you can. The 9 men nodded in understanding and filed out of the building, hopping aboard Team Reservoir Dogs' truck, which Green then drove directly through one of Kurogiri's gates, traversing well over 100 kilometers in a matter of moments. Taking back over from Tenko, Midoriya resumed his part of the lecture. The rest of you will be aiding us in the actual strike on the compound. La Brava, the small red-haired woman, saluted. You and Kurogiri will be taking up a recon and remote command position atop a nearby apartment block. Kurogiri will be on standby to warp us all away if necessary, while you will support us by communicating potential hazards to us and draining all of the Hisaiki's bank accounts for us. On the other hand, the rest of us will enter the compound on the first underground level, at the coordinates that Himiko gave us during her reconnaissance of the building a few weeks ago. Tenko and I can handle ourselves, as can gentle Midoriya said, while the silver-haired man nodded in agreement. Himiko, I want you and Inversion to stay close together. If Mimic divides us up, she'll be the best support that an ambush predator like you can have in direct combat. The blonde rolled her eyes, but acquiesced. The other girl, a brown-haired teen wearing a face mask, black pants, a black shirt with a pink necktie, and pink fingerless gloves, looked to her partner and nodded, a determined look in her brown eyes. Tenko once again took over, info-dumping about their potential foes. Our biggest issue will be Joy Irinaka, aka Mimic. He'll likely try to divide us from each other with his quirk and pit us against the remaining 8 bullets as soon as he realizes there's a problem, so be ready. Remember, lethal force is authorized for this mission. The Yakuza will likely be trying to kill us, so don't be afraid to beat them to it if you have no other choice. 2 more warp gates opened in the bar, each one leading to a different destination. Prometheus cleared his throat. This will be the League of Villains' first major operation against an enemy. Our objective is to bring down the Hisaikai and rescue the child named Eri, who is being held prisoner on the bottom underground floor of the building. Let the Yakuza extermination operation commence. Chapter end notes. Notes. And here we go. This chapter took only a day to complete, and for the first time ever, I've actually written a backlog on one of my fics. To recap, this chapter was half fun spy shenanigans, with Himiko infiltrating the Hisaikai's compound to steal all their potential tactical advantages, and half recruitment of manpower, with Midoriya negotiating with both Jiran and Compress over manpower. Overhaul has no idea that, by addressing the attacks on his trigger shipments personally, he's fallen right into his foe's trap. Then again, he has literally no idea that this is coming for him. La Brava and Gentle have entered the scene as members of Compress's National Thief Syndicate, as has a girl called Inversion. I wonder who she could be. Meanwhile, the unorthodox team-up of the sludge villain, Cider House, and Team Reservoir Dogs is about to be a massive pain in Chisaki's rear. Fun times. Anyway, stay tuned for Chapter 5, when the fun really begins. Cheers. DVD 181. Next update, September 4th. Chapter notes. You dare to raid us? See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. Shigaraki HQ, Tokyo. I'm in Manami, Aba said, her fingers flying across her laptop's keyboard as her computer finished connecting to the backdoor that Tenko and Himiko had previously established. Normally, hacking jobs she and Gentle were hired for involved her finding a way past the target security systems before they could proceed any further, so finding a client that already had an established backdoor into the target systems was a rare occasion. I'm looping the security footage at the warp point now. The coast is clear and you are free to proceed in. Understood, came Shimura's voice from the other side of the earpiece. Proceeding with the mission as planned. A few seconds later, black clouds erupted in a corridor on the first underground level of the Hisaki's headquarters. Out ran the 5 members of the actual strike team, dashing down the hallway towards their objective. Everyone knows the plan, right? Prometheus asked, making sure one final time that all players knew their part of the raid's overall goals. Midoriya was dressed in a dark suit with a bulletproof vest and dark green clip-on tie underneath, a metal mask with green lead accents on it covered his face. Gentle criminal nodded. I will proceed to the warehouse on the second underground level to dispatch any resistance there and begin inventorying their products, the silver-haired man said, readying his trusty cane for battle. Decay concurred. I'll traverse the facility planting the bombs our supplier sent us, Tenko said, referring to their online contact spyglass and the patented high-yield explosive baby she had sent them, a set of disc-shaped remotely detonated explosives that each yielded as much as a kilogram of C4. He wore little more than a plain black jumpsuit with the severed hands of his birth family gripping various parts of his body. And that means inversion, and I are with you, looking for the girl, Carmilla added, reaching for her belt to make sure her knives were all still there. She wore an oversized tan cardigan with a ballistic vest underneath, a skirt with knives clipped to it, knee pads and a mask with a tooth pattern on it connected to a special backpack. The masked girl with brown hair running beside her signaled her agreement with a quick thumbs up. That covers it well, the villain leader agreed, as they approached a corner. Heads up, team, there's a pair of thugs around that corner, La Brava's voice crackled in their earpieces. They haven't noticed you yet, so you have the element of surprise. The group nodded in agreement, before rounding the corner into battle. The 2 underlings in bird masks, one with webbed fingers and light blue hair, the other with fur and claws resembling a badger mutation, were startled when 5 people raced around the corner. The badger man didn't even have time to shout out a warning before Prometheus dodged around his wild swing and grabbed his arm, gracefully drop-kicking him in the face at the same time that Carmilla sunk a knife into his stomach. He dropped like a sack of bricks instantly. The other man shouted a wordless cry of rage as liquid started to drip from his finger webs. But Gentle clubbed him over the head with his cane at the same time that inversion delivered a brutal jab directly to his solar plexus. As he wobbled on his feet, Decay casually walked past and swept the man's legs out from under him, causing him to faceplant directly onto the concrete floor. Great work, team. That second guy's loud voice is going to be an issue though, his shout. They're alerted some other Yakuza to your presence. T-15 seconds before 5 more men get here, La Brava updated the team, working to loop camera footage before Mimic could notice. No plan ever survives contact with the enemy, Prometheus hummed to himself, picking up a baton from the smaller thug's belt. Underneath his mask, the teen grinned. Last one to beat 10 men is a rotten egg, he said as the sound of footsteps grew louder. Joy Iranaka, general manager of the Shigaraki and Overhaul's left-hand man, was generally considered a very calm and rational man. He had a bit of a sharp tongue, to be sure, and there was a reason nobody let him do any of the gang's negotiating, but when it came to managing the clan's day-to-day operations and ensuring that nothing was amiss, he was top-notch. Which is why he was panicking right now, as something was in fact horribly amiss. 2.5 hours after Overhaul, chronostasis, and half the bullets had left for Narahata. Mimic noticed an odd phenomenon with some of the cameras. They seemed to blip slightly in their coverage at certain points. Normally, he'd have dismissed this as just a sign that a camera was dying, but the man quickly realized there was a pattern. All of them were following a certain path down the hallways in the compound. When he saw a shadow far up in the corner, one of the cameras appear and then disappear 3 times, he realized what was happening. "We've been hacked," the man growled, slamming one fist down on his desk. Running a diagnostic check of the Hisaiki's computer system, Irinaka's eyes widened as he watched the last of the Hisaiki's monetary funds drain from their secret accounts at several major national banks under assumed identities and out of their system entirely via a backdoor in the junk mail folder of one of their 4th-year members. Vowing bloody murder on Akaza, Mimic wrestled back control of the cameras from their hacker with ease. On a nearby rooftop, La Brava smirked as she gave control of the compound's cameras back to Irinaka, and shuddered with fury at the sight of hoodlums in odd costumes going to town on his clan's members. Dialing as fast as he could, Mimic called Overhaul, hoping to warn his boss of the attack before it was too late. Narahata, Tokyo. To say that Kai Chisaki was in a bad mood would be an understatement. It was supposed to be another easy pest control operation: find the hoodlums that had been attacking there, trigger shipments, eliminate them, and wash the blood into Tokyo Bay. Then he could get back to the compound and return to his sessions with Eri. Overhaul was already mad that these diseased wretches had forced him to cancel today's in order to deal with them. Instead of it being an easy extermination operation, however, these random goons had proven unexpectedly competent. In fact, the one made of sludge had gotten a lucky hit in and knocked Tabe out, while the one with the strength quirk and the pig mutant had incapacitated Katsu came by luring him under a crane and dropping a cargo container on him. Now the Hisaiki's cleanup crew was down 1/3 of its men, and to make matters worse, all of the hoodlums had managed to escape onto a truck and were now forcing Chisaki and his remaining men to pursue them in a car chase. So when his phone began furiously ringing with a call from Mimic, the man's stress levels rapidly neared a boiling point. "What is it?" Overhaul growled at his lieutenant, only to be cut off by Mimic's panicked yell. "You need to get back here, now. It's all a diversion. Someone's attacking the compound right now, and someone else hacked our accounts and drained us dry of every single yen." "What?" Chisaki roared in fury. "Irinaka, these scum had better be dead before we get back, or you'll be dash," he began, before Setsuno cut him off. "Watch out," the blonde man shouted, turning the wheel of the limousine as hard as he could to avoid a high-pressure blast of seltzer water, which punched a hole through the windshield, comparable to a bullet hole. The leader of Cider House shouted in mock anguish over missing his target. "Damn it, I almost got him. Sludge, you're up." On it, the foul-smelling liquid man warbled, leaping off the back of the truck into the path of the speeding black limo. Neither Setsuno nor Overhaul had time to react before their car slammed into Mr. Sludge, who instantly wormed his way into the car's engine and crushed all the components into scrap metal while absorbing the oil, gasoline, antifreeze, and coolant in the engine into himself. "Thanks for the meal," Dorome shouted as he reformed behind the wrecked limo, then jumped into a nearby manhole down into the sores of Narahata. Overhaul roared in incoherent fury and exploded the door to his vehicle, leaping out just as Chronostasis performed a U-turn in the other limo and skidded to a stop next to him. Throwing the door to the intact vehicle open, Chisaki yanked Hojo out of the passenger's seat and slammed the door shut. "Get us back to the compound as fast as possible, we're under attack," he shouted. Chrono's eyes widened, but the loyal right hand of Overhaul required no further elaboration, speeding off into the distance while leaving the wrecked car behind. "Why the hell do we still work for him?" Hojo wondered aloud as he helped Setsuno haul the 2 incapacitated bullets out from inside the vehicle. "I don't know about you, but I don't work for him anymore," Setsuno replied as he finally Extracted tape from the burning wreck. Me neither, rumbled Katsuki, slowly coming back to consciousness against the side of the vehicle. Food, Tabe added incoherently. You said it, Buddy Hojo concurred, looking the other way to watch as cider house and reservoir dogs cheered in the distance, their truck getting smaller and smaller before turning a corner and disappearing entirely. And that's 10. Prometheus shouted as he headbutted a skinny Yakuza thug in the nose. Then laid the man low with a kick to the head. Looking around, the villain leader took a second to pout. Are you serious? I'm the last one to reach 10? Decay shook the dust off of his hands from a thug he'd just killed. In your defense, boss. You don't have a quirk that instantly destroys whatever it touches like I do, he said, reassuring the group's leader. A fair point, since I don't have one at all. Sound off, how many people have you each taken out? The villain leader called out. 12. Carmilla shouted, pulling one of her knives out of a thug's lower back. 14. Inversion added, pressing her fingertips together as 3 floating men behind her fell to the floor in an unconscious heap. Oops, make that 17. 22. Decay said, looking at the heaps of dust scattered down the corridor. 15. said Gentle bashfully, wincing slightly when the teenagers in the hall gave him the side eye. What? I generally avoid combat in favor of daring escapes. I prefer to be gentle with my escapades. The other 4 groaned at his pun, but stopped when the floor shook. You bastards, the building's corridors themselves seemed to shake in fury as a voice echoed all around them. How dare you burst into our home and hurt our family? You scum should know your place. As the concrete walls and floors of the corridors began to warp, Prometheus realized their foe. Irinaka. His using his mimicry quirk to possess the building's underground structure and reshape it at will, he shouted, before remembering one of the details of his quirk. Analysis of the man. Hold on, he's only supposed to be able to possess objects the size of a fridge. How is he doing this? Drugs, Decay supplied. The Hisashi are known for an ultra-refined trigger formulation. Known as black gold, some call it the caviar of quirk boosters. I'd wager Overhaul uses his quirk to break down normal trigger and remove the hazardous parts in order to create a formulation that is significantly stronger than average trigger and doesn't have negative drawbacks on the user's mentality. Knowing that won't help you, Mimic roared, as the hallways contorted further. Now, be scattered to your death. Carmilla and Inversion screamed in surprise as a sinkhole opened up and dragged them down a floor, while pillars shot out of opposite walls and carried Gentle and Decay in opposite directions. Several tendrils of liquid cement ensnared Prometheus's arms, dragging him upwards through a hole in the ceiling, leaving the corridor barren and empty. Danjuro Tobita was flung into the small room forcefully by Mimic's concrete tendril, but a gentleman like him wouldn't have anything less than a graceful, gentlemanly entrance, now. Would he? Gently rebound, the man called, using his quirk to create an aerial trampoline in the middle of the room for himself, bouncing off of it and spinning in midair to land gracefully on his feet. Bowing slightly, Gentle Criminal looked around the room and noticed that he wasn't alone. Another man stood on one side of the space, wearing a black cloak that concealed his entire body, a fully blackbird mask that covered his entire head, and a wide-brimmed hat atop his head. Pardon my intrusion, Gentle said. Do you know which way the exit is? The mystery man cut him off. What is your purpose in being here? To his surprise, Gentle found himself involuntarily answering the man. We are here in search of a child held captive by your clan. His eyes widened in surprise, having just given away the objective of their mission. The other man tapped an earpiece. They're here looking for Eri, he said simply, turning back to Gentle. Who is your leader? As a member of Peerless Legacy, I consider Mr. Compress my leader, but I was hired for this job by Prometheus of the League of Villains. The silver-haired man replied again, an irritated look crossing his face. A truth quirk. You must be Shin Nemoto of the 8 bullets then. I've been informed that your quirk is a non-combative one, which means that I have an edge over you in close combat then. Correct, Nemoto confirmed for his opponent. Unfortunately for you, I have no intention of fighting you in close combat. With that, the man withdrew a handgun and opened fire at Gentle. Tobita smiled slightly. One small issue with that, gently rebound. The volley of bullets fired by Nemoto rebounded off of an invisible air wall and immediately ricocheted back towards him. One of the projectiles shattered the gun in his hand, knocking it away and rendering it useless. Nemoto looked solemnly towards his now gun-free hand. Unfortunate. One final question. Is it true that you are legitimately in love with La Brava? Oh crap. Gentle thought, just before his mouth began to move on its own again, exposing his most embarrassing secret. Yes, I am. A high-pitched squeal from his earpiece caused the man to wince slightly. You mean it? Gentle? La Brava asked, a hopeful tinge to her voice. I do, Tobita admitted bashfully. I do love you, Manami. That's what I've always wanted to hear, Danjuro, the short woman on the other end of the communications line shouted. From the bottom of my heart, Gentle, I love you too. The man grinned as a deep pink aura surrounded him, his muscles straining against his fancy suit as La Brava's quirk, love, took effect on him. This was an unexpected possibility. Nemoto said in a neutral voice, even as he began to back up. Quite, Tobita responded, turning towards his foe. Now where were we? Oh yes. Gently, catapult. With that, the silver-haired gentleman picked the masked Yakuza up by the collar of his coat, spun a few times, and then threw the man through the nearest wall, opening up a hole into the corridor from whence he'd come. Back to the mission. With that, the artist known as Gentle Criminal proceeded once more towards his goal, running down the hallway for a ways before stomping one foot on the floor, opening up a hole to the next level down as he proceeded towards the underground warehouse. Behind him, the Yakuza named Shin Nemoto lay on the floor of the hallway in an unconscious daze, his mask and hat having fallen off somewhere on his way through the concrete wall. Lover mode was a terrifying force indeed. Oof, shouted Himiko Toga as she hit the floor, having just fallen through a hole in the ceiling of this lower corridor. A few moments later, her masked partner landed beside her, softly, touching her fingers together to deactivate her quirk. A flirtation quirk? Unfair. Carmilla groaned. Hey, turning into other people by drinking their blood is pretty cool too. Inversion chirped. Looking around them, Toga decided that maybe the other girl wasn't so bad after all, finding her cheerfulness somewhat infectious. The two of them were trapped in an impromptu room, with walls created by Mimic's quirk capping either end of the hallway to trap them in. Now, how are we going to get out of this? The sound of dripping liquid grabbed the attention of both teenagers, the noise seeming to come from all around them. What is that dash? Inversion began, before suddenly collapsing to her knees. "Tha whole world SS spinnin'," she slurred, her voice slipping slightly into a Kansai accent. Carmilla's eyes shot to the ceiling, where she was greeted by the sight of a skinny man, wearing a fur coat and brown slacks crawling upside down along the pipes snaking down the top of the hallway. The stench of alcohol wafted off of him in an almost tangible wave, prompting the blonde to wave her hand in front of her face in a futile effort to get rid of the smell. Well, what have we got air? The man burbled, pouring a bottle of alcohol into his mouth to the point where it overflowed and drained out of a pair of special drain tubes next to the eyes on his mask. A couple of little girls, far from home? Oh great, we got Deidoro Sakaki, the vampiric girl said, rolling her eyes slightly. Perhaps not the most difficult opponent we could have had this evening, but certainly the most annoying. Thayrit's my name, don't wear it out. Sakaki slurred, suddenly dropping to the floor and landing on his feet with deceptive grace, studying the brown-haired girl clutching her stomach behind Toga. The man's eyebrow quirked. One lil missy's already fallen to my Sloshed, he wondered aloud, referring to his alcohol-fueled disorientation quirk. I haven't tea. Even drunk much today. Are you okay? Carmilla asked her partner, slowly drawing a knife in preparation for a fight. Inversion nodded slightly. I've got issues with motion sickness from my quirk, she groaned, placing one hand over her mouth for a moment and swallowing. If you can keep him busy for a minute, I'll be back in the fight. The drunkard laughed incoherently, pulling several throwing knives out of his fur coat. I'd like to see her try, he said, before throwing one towards the immobilized teen. Toga's eyes widened as she reacted just in time to knock the knife off course with one of her own thrown knives, before lunging at the man. Oops, Chisaki said, taking another swig of alcohol. Looks like I need to drink some more. To slow you down, Lil Blondie. Himiko winced and stumbled as a wave of nausea hit her. But she did not relent. Something like this is nothing compared to how it felt to be starved of blood. Carmilla thought, swinging upwards with the knife in her right hand and clashing against Sakaki's own knives. The man briefly faltered in surprise at the force behind her swing, but tittered drunkenly and resumed his attack. The blonde girl gritted her teeth through the nausea and did her best to dodge the man's drunken and unpredictable swings, but found herself slowing due to his quirk. Trying a different approach, Carmilla got behind her opponent while slowing her breathing and clearing her mind, disappearing from the perception of the people around her. She had first figured out how to do this while hiding from the police after her incident, and, since it wasn't a quirk-based ability, Midoriya had almost gone crazy trying to figure out how it worked. Eventually the green-haired teen had thrown his hands up in defeat, simply said, "This is bullshit," and gone back to plotting the Hisashi's downfall. Huh. Chisaki wondered aloud as he turned around to, nothing. That's funny, could sworn she was right here. Shrugging his shoulders, the man turned back towards Inversion. Guess it's just you and me now, lil lady, he laughed, brandishing his knives as he stalked towards her. Let's see how Eloin you can last. A sudden pain blooming on the man's side halted him for a moment. What? He wondered, looking down to see a cut on his right just below his ribs. Where is she? More cuts slowly appeared on him as he grew increasingly agitated. Looking towards the still down Inversion, a cruel idea crossed his mind. Lil Missy, if ya wanna be such a hero, save your friend, he laughed, throwing another knife at the prone girl. Toga faded back into view, swinging one of her knives to deflect Sakaki's thrown one. Damn. He baited me into exposing myself and now I'm open, the blonde thought as she watched the drunkard wind up to throw several more knives, only for a blur to suddenly move past her towards Chisaki and around him. The alcoholic slowly lifted off the ground, his agitation increasing. What? Why am I? Floatin', he slurred, spinning in midair to see Inversion turn towards him, a look of triumph in her eyes. You. I thought ya were down? The brown-haired thief chuckled. Anti-nausea medication. I keep it on me because of my quirk, but it takes a minute to take effect, she explained. I knew that if I kept acting like I was immobilized by your quirk, you'd drop your guard and focus on Carmilla. Thanks to that, I was able to trap you in midair. Grinning under her mask, Inversion turned to her partner. Would you like to do the honors? With pleasure, the vampiric girl chuckled, leaping through midair onto the floating Sakaki's chest while brandishing a pair of knives. No. Wait, can't we just talk this out? The man stammered, trying to swing his own knives, but the blonde girl just laughed, a sadistic glint in her eyes. Oh please, like we'd give you that kind of dignity. Inversion turned away and winced as Chisaki screamed, the sound of knives repeatedly puncturing him echoing through the cramped space. After a minute, the screams stopped, and she sighed in relief, touching her fingertips together. Release, the brunette said. Sakaki's body hitting the floor with a slightly wet thud as her quirk deactivated. Toga walked past him, a spring in her step. Don't worry, I didn't stab him anywhere vital. But the blood loss will probably get him by the time we finish up, she said cheerfully. Inversion shuddered as she followed the other girl to the end of the hallway, where a featureless grey wall met them. Now how the heck do we get out of here? Chapter end notes. Notes. The raid has officially begun now, and the League isn't taking any prisoners. To recap, despite Mimic's best efforts, 2 of the 4 bullets left at the Hisashi's compound are down, and the 4 Overhaul took with them all quit because Chisaki is too incoherently angry to think right now. The Yakuza have literally no money anymore because the League and Peerless Legacy took it all. It's all gone. Their accounts are drained. Nobody gets paid anymore. All. Because Akaza clicked on the Find Hot Singles in Your Area link sent by Dustamigi at a41.co.jp. Unbelievable. Sakaki has been defeated and left for dead by Himiko Toga Carmilla and the mysterious thief Inversion. I wonder who that could be, while Gentle has laid waste to Shin Nemoto. I guess maybe Mr. Veritas shouldn't have teased Danjuro about his waifu, HM? Next chapter, we'll see Midoriya's encounter with the remaining 2 bullets, Mimic's untimely end, Eri's rescue, and the arrival of a truly incensed Kai Chisaki on scene. Thanks for reading. DVD 181. Next update, September 18th, RIP my backlog, guess I need to write a few more chapters. Chapter notes. Poached talent. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. Shai Hisasai HQ, Tokyo. While Gentle Criminal finished pulverizing Shin Nemoto into unconsciousness and inversion, aided Carmilla in personally introducing Deidoro Sakaki to her very sharp knives, Prometheus found himself in a much more difficult situation thanks to Mimic's attack. Bodily hurled upwards into what looked to be a ceremonial dining and meeting room, the teenager had just enough time to regain his bearings before being forced to leap out of the flight path of an aerial sofa. Cursing slightly, Midoriya continued to dodge the flying furniture, finally finding refuge behind an overturned dining table. After a few moments, the furniture bombardment ceased, and the teen could finally safely see his attackers. 2 men stood side by side at the far end of the room, facing towards him. The man on the left was an enormous redhead wearing a blackbird mask, brown cargo pants and a white tank top with metal gauntlets on his fists. Meanwhile, the man on the right was a much shorter blonde, wearing a plain black yukata and a brown plague mask while keeping his eyes closed. God damn it, Tengai, he dodged, the larger man said as he retrieved an oversized porcelain vase, before chucking it towards Prometheus's position. And I didn't hit him that time either. Rapper, you imbecile, that's because he's hiding behind the table, the now-named Tengai responded, facepalming. And why did you throw that vase? I am fairly certain that it belonged to the Hisashi's old boss, and Master Overhaul will not be pleased that you broke it. Shut up, Tengai. I don't care about Overhaul. Rapper bellowed, throwing a right at his companion. A translucent barrier shimmered into existence and blocked the blow, though it was clear from Tengai's expression that blocking it was somewhat demanding for his quirk. Prometheus used the duo's bickering as an opportunity to move to a better hiding spot. Unfortunately for him, Tengai noticed. We will address your lack of respect for authority within this organization later. Our quarry is attempting to escape, the man said, pointing towards the teenager. Damn it! Rapper shouted, turning his attention from his partner to the interloper. Get back here, asshole. Moving with surprising speed, the man quickly traversed the room and tossed aside the maplewood desk Midoriya had hid behind with his left hand, while lining up a devastating hit with his right fist. The teenager barely had time to dodge before Rapper's punch crashed where he had stood moments before, pulverizing the room's concrete floor. If I take even one hit I'm dead, training be damned, the teen thought, knowing that his quirklessness put him at a big disadvantage. Human evolution hadn't benefited just the Quirked, quirkless people born in the 22nd century like himself enjoyed higher bone density and better physical strength, reaction time and disease resistance as teenagers than all but the strongest pre-quirk athletes, but relative to those with quirks, they simply couldn't measure up. Now that his cover was gone, Prometheus was left with no choice but to run, dodge and pray. Kamisama, I need a serious miracle right now, he thought, turning and throwing a smoke grenade at Rapper. The irate redhead deflected the projectile with a casual backhand while continuing to charge at his foe. To his surprise, however, Prometheus watched the grenade bounce at Tengai's feet, detonating in a cloud of white smoke that blinded the man and obscured him from view. This might just be my chance, the teen thought, remembering the information Toga had gleaned on the 8 bullets from Overhaul's computers. Skidding to a stop, Midoriya held one hand out in front of him towards the charging man. Kendo Rapper, you're hired. Her, the man shouted, himself skidding to a stop just before he could run into his opponent. Don't wheeze listen cough to him, the voice of Tengai sounded from within the smoke, muffled by his coughing. Our team is in need of a genuine brawler and heavy hitter who wants to fight strong opponents for the sake of villainy and or justice, depending on the operation. Midoriya continued, now in full-on recruiter mode. If you agree, you'd start immediately. What's in it for me? The man asked, one of the eye holes on his mask twisting in suspicion. I'm glad you ask. Prometheus said. The League of Villains offers decent company, housing, stock options in several major companies that we may or may not at least partially control, and a complete benefits package that includes health insurance, dental, visual and a retirement plan. Also, here's your salary. Holding his phone forward, the villainous mastermind showed off the amount that Rapper would be paid to the man himself. The red-haired Yakuza's eyes almost bugged out. Kami, that's a lot of zeros, he breathed in a reverent tone. Under his mask, Midoriya grinned. That's monthly. As the eyes on Rapper's mask widened further, the teen thought to himself, jackpot. When do I start, boss? The man asked. Right now, Prometheus replied. We could use the extra help in rescuing the small child named Eri that Overhaul has been abusing. He's been what? Rapper roared, rounding in fury on Tengai as the smoke cloud around the other man cleared. Tengai, did you know about this? Master Overhaul's work will save humanity, Tengai responded, although his eyes bugged out in fear. He knew Rapper had a fondness for the child, even if he was kept in the dark about why she lived in the compound. I do not care whether or not he has to sacrifice the well-being of one child for that future. I see, growled Rapper as he stalked towards his former partner. You're just as guilty. Then. What dash? Tengai began before a fist impacted his barrier, rocking it hard enough to force him down on one knee. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's people who hurt kids, the redhead began, winding up another punch. And if you're gonna just go along with what Overhaul is doing to her, that makes you just as guilty to me. Rapper's machine gun. With that, Kendo Rapper unleashed a furious barrage of blows with his strong shoulder quirk directly at his former handler. Tengai's barrier lasted 9 full seconds under the rain of fists before breaking. 1 second later, his jaw broke in much the same way his barrier did. By the time 15 seconds in total had passed, the man was unconscious and blooded. As he left the room behind with his new subordinate, Izuku Midoriya's expression betrayed nothing. Internally, however, he was both giddy and jittery. I cannot believe that actually worked, but I'm glad it did, he thought, an image of himself as battered and blooded as Tengai briefly flashing in his head. Come along, Rapper-san, he addressed his new companion. We have a girl to rescue. Please, boss, the redhead responded, discarding the bird mask to reveal a chiseled face with a large scar traversing it vertically across his mouth from just below his left eye to the top of his jaw. Call me Rapper. Elsewhere in the compound, Tenko Shimura was ejected into a small room, flying head over heels until landing on a pile of empty cardboard boxes. Looking around, the elder teenager realized he was in some kind of storeroom. Shelves filled with various items lined the walls of the room. On either side of a big shelf in the middle, 2 patches of suspiciously smooth concrete betrayed where Mimic had blocked the doorways to contain him. Hunting around the room, Decay found a few packages of decent-looking instant ramen, which he snatched up for future use, some snack bars which he promptly ate, and an enormous medical kit that he placed a small warp beacon on for Kurogiri to retrieve later. Pushing aside a few of the empty boxes he had landed on, the young man's face widened in an amused grin as he produced several 6-packs of energy drinks with some generic anime women on them, all labeled with a sticky note denoting them as property of Kurono H. 5 minutes and 3 of those energy drinks later, Shimura started to die of boredom upon realizing he'd forgotten to bring his Switch and wasn't in the mood to play any of the mobile games he had downloaded on his phone. "Hey, asshole," he addressed the concrete wall. "Where's the exit? I need to use the bathroom." Mimic did not respond, much to Decay's annoyance. "Alright, keep your secrets. It'll be your funeral though," he continued, placing all 5 fingers on one of the newer sections of the wall. Over the years since he'd first met his cousin adoptive brother, Tenko had learned a lot about himself and his quirk. His control over his powers had massively improved and grown with a proper education, parental affection, and therapy from a medical student and pastime psychologist who happened to be their underground doctor of choice, Medic. In a recent test, the League had discovered that his quirk had developed a new facet as his strength skyrocketed and his control improved. The moment his fingers made contact with the wall, Decay's secondary ability activated a touch-based telemetry power that allowed him to sense the internal structure of what he was about to decay and what was touching it. Given how Mimic had spread himself throughout the compound, Tenko's quirk registered all the concrete in the compound as a single object, allowing him to locate his allies and his enemies on a mental map of the facility and map exactly what he wanted to decay in the compound. Checkmate. Precision decay. A second later, cracks began to spiderweb up the walls as his quirk took hold of the building's concrete. Feeling the structure of the facility in his mind again, Tenko controlled the decays spread to avoid his allies until it reached a point where it could spread out, at which point he let go and turned around as the wall crumbled. And now, infectious decay. Joy Irinaka initially felt a slight itch as the decay slowly took hold of the concrete he possessed, but this quickly became an unbearable burning pain. Feeling the phantom pain of the decay crawling through his flesh, Mimic used his quirk to escape as quickly as possible to the roof of the compound, breathing heavily as he ejected himself atop the structure. Just as he thought he was safe, however, a crumbling roof tile below caused him to realize he was in mortal danger. A moment later, the entire roof crumbled below him while the decay infected his body. Joy Irinaka died screaming 20 seconds after Tenko Shimura unleashed his quirk, a loud rumble waking up the entire neighborhood as infectious decay carved a perfectly circular hole 6 stories into the ground. As he waltzed up to the edge of the pit, the villain named Decay took a look at his handiwork and whistled, before placing a hand on the floor and precisely applying his quirk again to smoothly descend 3 floors to the basement. From a hallway on the opposite side, Gentle Criminal leapt into the void, a deep fuchsia aura surrounding him. "Gently, rebound," the man shouted, creating an air trampoline halfway down to slow his descent. Danjuro Tobita landed a moment later with enough force to crack the concrete ground floor. Decay and Gentle nodded to each other, appraising their surroundings. Just below where Decay had been, Inversion and Carmilla floated into midair, slowly descending towards ground level. When they were just above the floor, the brown-haired thief touched her fingers together. Release. The duo dropped to the ground, looking around the cavern that was decayed into the building. Guys. A little help here," a voice called out to them from above. Looking up to one of the topmost stories, the group of 4 saw their boss with an unfamiliar man standing behind him. "We need to get down from here, but neither of us have quirks that make it possible. I suppose it will be our duty to retrieve you then," Sir Gentle said. "Miss Inversion. Fastball special?" "I'd be delighted," the masked teenager replied. A second later, Inversion leapt onto Gentle's hand, whereupon the man threw her with all his might. Having been empowered by lover mode, his throw was on par with the high-level strength quirk users, and the teenaged thief was gracefully landing next to her temporary boss within moments. Tapping both Prometheus and Rapper on the shoulders, the trio gently floated to the ground below before she released her quirk. "I found a new recruit," the group's leader announced. "This is Rapper. He was working for the Hisashi, but now he's our brawler and enforcer. He used to be a legend in underground tournaments before Overhaul recruited him. I look forward to working with you," Rapper shouted, bowing at a perfect 90-degree angle. "Well, you definitely get style points for that intro. Guess you're our newest party member. Now, we'll get you leveled up yet," Decay said, turning towards one of the corridors. "This must be the violet clearance floor." Carmilla nodded in affirmation, having gathered that intel in the first place. Eri woke up to the sound of footsteps outside her door again. Despite her best efforts, the girl couldn't help but whimper. The only people who ever visited her were Chisaki, Mimic or Kurono. Their presence almost always meant another session with Overhaul, and all the pain that came with. To her surprise, however, the door opened not to reveal any of the above, but rather an unfamiliar girl with blonde hair, and the same boy with green hair she had seen a few weeks earlier. This time, however, he wore a tuxedo and an odd mask that covered the lower half of his face. "Eri," the teen asked. "Is that you?" The small child crawled out from her bed's thin sheets, stumbling towards him. "You came back for me. But why?" Suddenly, a realization hit her. "You have to run. If Chisaki sees you, he'll dash." At that point, the blonde girl carefully pulled her into a hug, patting her on the back. "It'll be all right. Chisaki isn't here right now, and we'll have you out of here by the time he comes back." Midoriya joined Toga in her embrace of Eri, and soon the child fell into a peaceful slumber, perhaps the first time in over a year that she had slept well. Activating a warp beacon, Midoriya stood up again as Kurogiri opened a portal to their location. "Himiko, take her back home and look after her. The rest of us will finish the raid and set the trap." Carmilla nodded as she picked the child up and walked through the portal, returning to Oboro's tavern. "Yo, little brother," Decay said, sticking his head into the room. "We found some things you might be interested in. One of them appears to be the Hisashi's old boss." "Show me," Prometheus replied, turning to follow his cousin towards the recent finds. A few moments later, the duo arrived at an ornate wooden door with the Hisashi's crest emblazoned on it. Opening the door, Tenko revealed the inside to his adoptive brother and boss. An absolutely spotless room in traditional Japanese decor greeted them, though elaborate medical devices covered one entire wall. In the middle, an elderly man reclined on a hospital bed, the devices beside him beeping slightly as his vitals were displayed on them. "Is he dead?" Inversion asked as she entered the room. "No, just in a deep sleep, or more accurately, a coma," Midoriya responded. "Fan out and search the room. We need some indication as to why he's like this." "I think I might know," Rapper said, sticking his head around the corner. "I heard some rumors when I first joined from some of the original members. Apparently the Oyaban didn't like the way Chisaki was running things and the research he was doing after being promoted to Wakagashira, and confronted him on it. They had a big argument, and shortly afterwards the boss ended up in a coma." "I see, an ideological power struggle," Prometheus muttered. "The rumors I heard said that Overhaul put him in a coma with his quirk and isn't planning on letting him out until his research is done, whatever that is," Rapper said. "Incidentally, Those guys I heard it from? They disappeared pretty soon afterward, right while he and his top guys were bringing in a bunch of new guys. Makes sense, he removed the entire old guard and replaced the clan membership with people loyal only to him, the Greenette said. Do you know what research he was doing? That's why I came down here to get you. Gentle-san, and I just found his lab inversion. Said. What the hell is this? Prometheus wondered aloud, looking around the room he had just entered. The entire room was white and outfitted with all sorts of unfamiliar medical devices. Computer terminals and large refrigerators. In the center sat a bright pink medical chair, its color a disturbing contrast to the restraints covering it and the large needles and phlebotomy apparatus on its back. This must be where Overhaul tortured her. Decay trailed off, his fingers twitching slightly. Noticing this, Prometheus stepped forward and patted him on the back, helping to ground him. As Tenko was himself a former victim of child abuse, the Greenette was able to instantly tell that the room could potentially trigger Decay's trauma. Tenko, why don't you, Rapper and Gentle, go inspect the loading dock and take inventory of anything useful there? Quirk boosters, weapons, anything of the sort. Inversion, and I will find answers here, Midoriya said, addressing his adoptive brother. Tenko nodded silently and left the room, the other two men following behind him. Reaching one of the terminals, Prometheus tried to activate it, but found that it was password locked. I should have known, the teen muttered to himself, tapping his earpiece. Kurogiri, could you please warp Manami-san to my location? I require her aid. Understood, young master, the warper responded. Less than a minute later, La Brava's program had finished cracking Overhaul's password and unlocked the knowledge therein for Midoriya to behold. The pint-sized woman then returned to the safety of the bar. In the meantime, the villain boss had begun browsing through Overhaul's files while downloading all his proprietary research to a set of hard drives he brought with him. What he found sickened him. The young man's eyes widened in horror as he watched recordings of Chisaki's experiments. How he strapped the child to the chair in the room's center, drained her of blood until she died of hypovolemic shock, and then used his quirk to overhaul her back to life. His mission statement about the creation of a quirk-destroying drug in the hopes of eliminating quirks and bringing the Yakuza back to prominence. His plan to pull the boss out of a coma and derage him with Ares' quirk once the Hasaikai ruled the underworld once more, regardless of the consequences for the rest of mankind. I think I'm going to be sick, he finally muttered, while Inversion's face had turned pale from horror. Finding the nearest trash can, Midoriya emptied his stomach into the receptacle. Then turned to his companion as he affixed his mask to his face once more. Inversion, please. Go assist the other three in liberating the loading dock of its contents. I will join you momentarily. 3 minutes later, after sending the prototypes of the quirk-destroying drug and all of Overhaul's research data to his father's hideout via one of Kurogiri's warp gates, Prometheus calmly lit a Bunsen burner, opened the top of several pure oxygen tanks, and shut the door behind him. A few minutes after that, the room exploded, as did everything inside of it. 90 minutes later, the squeal of tires on pavement and screech of brakes heralded the arrival of an incredibly angry man, the black sedan pulling up to the curb as Overhaul exploded the door to the car and hurled himself out to the walkway. Looking up at the compound he called home, the man's eyes widened in horror, and hives slowly began to break out on his skin as he comprehended the disaster facing him. In front of him, the compound was in ruins. A gargantuan hole dominated the center of the building, looking as if some ancient god of Shinto mythology had found his existence personally offensive and had summoned a natural disaster to destroy his house. From the bottom of the hole, a deep red glow signified that a fire was burning deep in the underground levels, destroying his life's work. And in front of the hole, standing on the roofline, the perpetrators made themselves known. From Overhaul's left, he spied a tall man wearing dress clothes and carrying a cane, a seemingly teenaged girl wearing similar clothing, another individual in a business suit, a man who seemed to be wearing severed hands, and the most uncontrollable of his 8 bullets. Kendo rapper. As the Yakuza boss's eye twitched at the betrayal of his subordinate, the one in the middle took his mask off and stepped into the glow of the fires downstairs, revealing the face of the same child that Eri had briefly escaped into the arms of almost a month prior. At that point, Chisaki already understood the goal of the attack, even if he didn't fully comprehend it. Overhaul, I presume? Izuku Midoriya addressed the man, a cheeky grin on his face. I hope you don't mind that we let ourselves in, but you see, you had something just irresistible. To us. I'd say she was sad to go, but, well, the grin turned from cheeky to mockingly malicious. We both know she wasn't. And guess what? You'll never see her again. At this point, Overhaul couldn't handle it anymore. With a scream of inarticulate rage, the man slammed his hand on the ground, creating a spike of concrete that carried him towards the roof, where he swore he'd murder that child with his bare hands. The only response he received as he got closer was a widening of that infuriating grin. To be continued. Chapter end notes. Notes. Remember when I said the next update would be September 18th? Well, almost 3 goddamn weeks later, I finally got it done. You guys have gone without a chapter for a month, and that's just shameful on my part. The first 2 paragraphs of this chapter took from late August until today to write, and the rest took like 2 hours overall. I'm sorry. Anyway, the raid is almost over, and to recap, the rapper is the newest member of the League of Villains, acting as an enforcer and heavy hitter in close combat. Midoriya's recruiting pitch and appeal to his sense of honor has officially brought him into the fold as the only Hisashi member to join them. Overhaul's history in charge and experiments have been explained, the compound has been ransacked, and almost everything of value has been shipped via Kurogiri to one of AFO's warehouses. Mimic is dead, having fallen victim to Tenko's incredible strength and quirk control. Rip Bozo, thou shalt not be missed. And now, Overhaul has arrived, and is furious beyond rational thought. This can't possibly backfire on him, right? No promises, but I'm gonna try to have the next chapter up by October 16th at latest. Ideally by the 9th. Peace. DVD 181. Chapter Notes. Overhaul. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. Hisashi HQ, Tokyo. Chisaki roared in inarticulate fury as the ground under his feet reshaped itself, becoming a spike that carried him from the courtyard in front of the Hisashi's manor up to what remained of the building's roof. The green-haired child facing him simply leapt aside, that infuriating grin never leaving his face. Who the hell are you, anyway? The man shouted, veins bulging outwards around his eyes. Another victim of society infected with the hero syndrome? Another patient of the quirk disease? Midoriya chuckled. Oh please, you make my motives seem much more pedestrian than they really are. If you must know, however, I am Prometheus, leader of the League of Villains. The teenager introduced himself, bowing slightly. But when child abuse is involved, I might as well be little more than another concerned citizen like so many others who you erased for their caring gaze towards your former ward. Enough talking. You can die now, Overhaul replied, lunging forward with his hand extended towards his soon-to-be victim. A slight pain stabbed through his shoulder for a brief instant, but the man thought nothing of it, laying one hand on the face of the dead man, walking and activating his quirk. To his shock, however, nothing happened. Your research was truly fascinating stuff, Prometheus said, freeing himself from the surprised Yakuza's grip and sauntering past him. The white-haired man, covered in hands, threw an object down to the group's leader, who caught it and held it up for Overhaul to see. The man's blood ran cold as he watched Prometheus reach into his pocket and produce a unique syringe-tipped bullet, one Overhaul himself had created. I mean, look at this. To think you actually produced a legitimate quirk-suppressing drug. And not one of those amped-up opioids the government refers to by that name, but a legitimate suppressant that only targets the quirk factor without adversely affecting other aspects of the victim's health. Prometheus lauded Overhaul while sidestepping the latest suicide charge from the enraged, temporarily quirkless man. Not only that, you also made a working prototype of an actual quirk-destroying drug that seemingly turns back time on evolution itself. It's a shame, really, he continued mournfully. All it took to achieve that goal was killing and reviving Eri-chan nearly every day for over a year. Overhaul screamed incoherently again and charged at Prometheus, but this time the teenager didn't sidestep him. Instead, right as Overhaul reached for his throat, Izuku Midoriya firmly planted his fist directly into Chisaki's solar plexus. Overhaul crumpled to the ground, ripping off his bird mask and beginning to involuntarily vomit from the hit he'd taken, even ignoring the hives breaking out on his skin. Can you imagine how it must feel? To feel your life slipping away, to see the darkness creeping in at the edges of your vision, to fade away only to be brought back in an explosion of unimaginable pain, and then to know that it'll all happen again to you tomorrow, and that you'll never be free of that fear. Prometheus wondered aloud, standing above Chisaki's shaking form. Crouching down next to his victim, Prometheus stared the Yakuza right in the eye. Chisaki, I know more about you than you might think. Much like Eri did, you killed one of your parents in your quirk manifestation, but sadly, you never forgave yourself. You became a genius biochemist, businessman, and crime lord, yet when presented with your boss's granddaughter, you weren't smart enough to realize that taking your self-hatred out on her as a research method wasn't the right thing to do. Standing up, Midoriya raised his arms to either side. And your philosophy is all manner of wrong anyway. Quirks aren't a disease, a curse, a malevolent stain on humanity, they're a gift of evolution. Even I can see that, and I wasn't lucky enough to receive such a gift. Looking back to his foe, Prometheus let a look of disdain mar his features. Honestly, for someone so gifted, you really aren't very smart. And because what you lack in common sense, you decided to make up for in abusiveness, we can't let you leave here alive. Tapping his earpiece, Prometheus sent a single simple command to the party on the other end of the line. Do it. Send him in. Overhaul had just enough time to stumble back to his feet when a portal of black mist opened atop the roof. Then it hit him, a sudden feeling of sheer hatred, of pure, refined, unadulterated malice. The man who stepped onto the roof stood over 2 meters tall, clad in a formal suit with a black mask covering his entire head and neck. Most notably, however, he gave off an undeniable presence of pure power, of incredible strength, and of incredible bloodlust. Overhaul was forced back to his knees by the feeling, but he was hardly the only one affected. Inversion hid behind the furiously sweating gentle criminal, and the rapper was actually trembling. The only two unaffected were Prometheus and Decay, who were used to this man's aura. Chisaki, I presume? It has been far too long since I last saw you, the man began, and Overhaul's strength failed further. He knew that voice, and the last time he had heard it was when he, his Oyaban, and the heads and clan captains of multiple other Yakuza clans had been forced to bow to that voice's owner. All, for one, Chisaki gasped out. Oh, you do remember me, the symbol of evil said, a hint of glee entering his voice, and a feeling like an entire melting glacier ran down Overhaul's spine. Do tell me, how is old man Muraski doing? Well, I guess admittedly I was already an adult when his grandparents were born, but he at least looked old. Why are you here? Overhaul managed to say, despite the feeling of certain death lingering over his head. Funny you should ask that. I heard from my heir here that a small child with an utterly fascinating quirk was under your care. All for one explained, gesturing to Prometheus. But of course, I also know you are an interesting specimen yourself when it comes to the Quirk you were gifted with, so I just had to make a personal call. Gift? Chisaki questioned. Quirks are curses, not gifts. Oh, but on that point I disagree. All for One replied, holding his arms open wide in the same way his son had moments earlier. Evolution marches on, gifting new adaptations to living beings via both random chance and adaptive pressure. These gifts help their owners propagate their genes into the void of eternity, and themselves are spread as well. I don't know what that could be called other than a gift, a benefit, indeed, perhaps a blessing. You don't understand, Overhaul attempted to explain, but the pressure of all four One's killing intent on him hit a critical mass as the man reached down and grabbed his throat, lifting him into the air. Neither do you, and quite frankly, you never will, the symbol of evil said, taking hold of Overhaul's quirk factor with his own and pulling. Black and red lightning crackled and Chisaki screamed in pain as he was liberated from the curse he believed to have ruined his life. You saw quirks as a curse, so I took yours from you. I hope you remain grateful to me in your final moments. Walking over to the edge of the hole in the roof, All for One regarded the struggling form of Overhaul with contempt. So with that in mind, goodbye, Overhaul. A moment later, he let go. Turning away from the struggling, dying form in the basement of the building, All for One addressed his heir and the League. You have done well this evening. I shall retire for the evening now, but soon after you return, I would like my son to visit me. I have a gift to share with you. With that, the symbol of evil returned through one of Kurogiri's portals to his hideout. That was fucking terrifying, Rapper managed. Singularity and Gentle both nodded in agreement, themselves still shivering slightly in fear. Don't worry, you'll get used to it, Decay surmised, before turning to his adoptive brother. The cops will be here in about 5 minutes. They've stopped chasing the reservoir dogs. We should leave. All right, Prometheus muttered, descending off the roof of the building with his colleagues to the street outside the Hisashi's manor. Once they had retreated a safe distance, the teenager produced a detonator from within his vest, removed the safety and switched it on. A moment later, dozens of the dark web bombmaker spyglasses high-yield explosive babies all activated in tandem, collapsing the entire complex in a cloud of fire, soot and concrete dust. The 5 criminals all left the scene seconds later via one of Kurogiri's portals, leaving no trace they had ever been there in the first place. 4 days later. Was killing Muraska-san truly the only way, in your opinion? Hisashi Midoriya questioned. His son from his life support chair at his Yokohama hideout, scrutinizing the tired-looking teenager standing before him. I think he deserved the dignity of a peaceful death, after being kept in a coma for so long. By a man he thought he could trust, Izuku responded. I hope his soul was freed by my actions, granting him the eternal rest we all hope will await us. Noble enough a goal, to be sure. What else was gained from your mission? Hisashi asked. We obtained 48 completed samples of the quirk-suppressing drug and a similar number of bullets containing it, 12 prototype samples of a quirk-destroying drug, nearly 5,000 doses of trigger, of which 1,100 were Overhaul's special black gold formulation, and nearly 3 billion yen, of which we kept 40%, Izuku elaborated. Of the remaining 60%, another 40 went to the Peerless Legacy for their services, and 20% went to Jiran for his. Hisashi chuckled. You may have overpaid Jiran somewhat, but I can accept that on your first time negotiating a deal. What of the girl? Eri is settling in well back at home. After Mom and Himiko finished bathing her and bandaging her wounds, she slept for nearly 3 days straight before waking up, Izuku said. However, she was up in time for breakfast this morning. Apparently she thinks omelette rice is delicious and loves apples. Fantastic! Hisashi exclaimed. I'm happy to hear she is slowly adjusting and leaving behind what Overhaul did to her. And speaking of that man, I have a gift for you, son. Come. Here, please. A gift? Izuku asked, stepping closer. What is it? The teenager was cut off when his father put one hand on his forehead and pushed slightly. Black and red bioelectricity crackled around the two as Izuku felt something warm slither its way into his jeans, finding where his quirk factor would be if he had one, and stopping abruptly. Fascinating, Hisashi commented, before pushing harder. A strange tension filled Izuku's body, before suddenly snapping as he felt a new sensation spread through his body, like a new set of muscles he never knew he had. What did you do? He wondered aloud, dropping to the ground gasping for air. Hisashi slumped back into his chair, slightly winded himself. It's as I suspected, the older man began. You never were truly quirkless. I never knew about my quirk until I accidentally stole fire breath when I was almost 20, so I long wondered if you were the same. I just gave you Overhaul, but given the effort I had to put into it, I think we discovered that you have your own form of All for One. I have a quirk? Izuku asked, hesitantly placing his right hand on the ground. The teenager felt his senses expand past his fingertips and into the concrete floor. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before, from the individual quarks vibrating within the atomic nuclei, to the electrostatic and ionic bonds tying atom to atom, to the physical lattice of the concrete. He felt it all. And for a moment, Izuku Midoriya wondered if he had just stared into the face of all creation, yet somehow walked away with his mind intact. Knowing what he wanted to do, the teenager grasped at the concrete structure and visualized what he was trying to create. The process was almost automatic. Seconds later, a portion of the floor exploded into dust, then began reshaping itself into a humanoid shape. Hisashi unsurprisingly started coughing when faced with a concrete sculpture in the shape of his nemesis, but didn't let his surprise show. Very good, Izuku. Can you undo what you just did? The man nearly breathed a sigh of relief when the statue returned to the floor from whence it had come. As he stood back up, Izuku noticed an odd sensation spreading through his body. To him, it felt like a weird combination of muscle soreness, hunger pangs, and itchiness. Through it all, he could almost swear he heard a voice whispering more. Noticing his son's hesitance, Hisashi spoke up. Is something wrong? I feel odd, Izuku said. A weird sensation, kind of like being sore, hungry, and itchy all at once. Hisashi asked. Before Izuku could confirm it, the man elaborated. That's the feeling of quirk hunger. Since quirks are a body part, they demand stimulation, and difficult or powerful quirks require more than most. Is there a remedy for it? The teen asked. There wasn't when I first manifested mine, so I had to satiate it for the longest time by taking quirks. Problem is that it's kind of like a drug addiction, it increases the demand over time, causing the eventual withdrawal symptoms to be worse, Hisashi said. However, Shigaraki and I came up with a theory to solve this issue, playing catch. Catch? Izuku asked, utterly bewildered. Like, with a ball? That kind of catch? Correct, except the ball is a quirk or 5, Hisashi elaborated. Take my hand, Izuku. The teen did so and immediately saw the same black and red electricity dancing as his father pushed several more quirks over to him. I just gave you adrenaline, biospeech, great gains, color change, aqualung, parking space, and pocket dimension, Hisashi said. Every afternoon, I want you to come visit me, and for 20 minutes we'll practice tossing those quirks back and forth. Eventually your quirk will be exercised enough that you won't end up having the withdrawal symptoms I had if you decide not to take any new quirks for some time. Izuku nodded solemnly, but internally he was slightly giddy. For most of his life he'd had no quirk, but all of a sudden he had 9. As he bid his father goodbye and left through one of Kurogiri's portals, the teen wondered how he could make the most of this new gift and become a proper hero, preferably without drawing suspicion to himself. One day later, I'm home, Izuku called, taking his shoes off as he stepped into his family home. His school day had been pretty peaceful, all things considered, mostly because he'd successfully evaded Bakugou with little difficulty during lunchtime and after school thanks to some of his new tricks. Quirks are really useful. Welcome back, Oni-chan, Eri shouted as she rounded the corner and tackled him in the legs. Oof, the teenager let out a slight cry of surprise. I'm glad to see you too, Eri. Did you do anything fun today? Yeah, the girl said cheerily. This big man called Sensei came from one of Borosan's clouds and said he'd been really hurt and that my quirk could help him. I thought he was lying like Chisaki, but Mama said he was alright, so I used it and he turned all young again. What? Izuku yelped, leaping to his feet and rounding the corner into the living room. There on the couch sat his mother, but next to her was the same white-haired red-eyed giant of a man Izuku remembered from his childhood, a face he hadn't seen in over 5 years. Dad? Why your face? You're better, the greenette stammered in surprise and joy. Surprise? You were right about Eri-chan's quirk, it really is something incredible, Hisashi said, standing up and stretching his limbs. I feel so light without all that medical equipment weighing me down. And I can see again. Now I can see just how much of a lady killer my son has grown up into, he laughed. Now I can truly support you, without any fear or issue, the man continued. Reaching down and ruffling his son's hair, Hisashi Shigaraki smiled. I look forward to seeing just how far you'll go with my own 2 eyes, son. Chapter end notes. Author's notes. I told y'all it wouldn't be a full month before you got the next chapter, and I'm glad to have delivered. With that said, the Yakuza extermination arc is now over. To recap, Overhaul has now had a building dropped on him, and as we know, that usually kills quirkless people. His boss is also dead for reasons explained above, as are Sakaki, Tengai and any other Hasaikai mooks left in the compound. If you were paying attention to the AO3 tags, you'd notice Midoriya Izuku has all 4-1 quirk in them, and now you can see why. Overhaul is just the start of this man's collection, after all. Hisashi is back at full health, and that never bodes well for Hero Society. Oops. Anyway, guess what? Canon starts in this next chapter, with the introduction of the symbol of peace and a surprise tool that will help us later called OFA. Don't miss it. Next update, hopefully October 30th. Chapter notes. Symbol of peace. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. Symbol of peace. Musutafu, 2 weeks after the Shai Hasaikai attack. I know that look on your face, kid. You're a hero fanboy, aren't you? This question was posed to one Izuku Midoriya, age 13, by a middle-aged man with odd star-shaped growths on either side of his head. The two of them were part of a large crowd that had gathered at a train station in Tatooine Ward, Musutafu, watching several local heroes apprehend a giant villain that had stolen someone's purse. Oh. In a manner of speaking, I guess I am the green-haired teen responded, looking up from his notebook to address the man. Lemme guess you want to be a hero yourself, don't ya? The man continued, chuckling a little. How did you guess? The notebook, the starry eyes or the muttering? Midoriya quipped in response, before his eyes were drawn back to the scene by the arrival of a new costumed crusader, the arboreal hero, Kamu Woods. Attention, Ivildor. You have violated Article 1, Section 3, Subsection 1 of the Japanese Quirk Code, and thus have been categorized as a villain. The hero addressed the man, evading his enraged swings with ease. Illegal quirk use, disturbing the peace, disrupting rush hour, theft and assault. You truly are the epitome of evil. That might be an exaggeration, Midoriya said in exasperation, thinking of his father's various misdeeds over a century and a half of villainy while jotting down notes. Heck. What I did to Overhaul 2 weeks ago was legally far worse than this. Woods began to extend his arm and activate his quirk, much to the hero fanboys' excitement. Here it comes. Kamu Woods' restraining super move, the lacquered chain binding prison. Canyon Cannon. Before the move could connect, a gigantic blonde woman wearing a skin-tight bodysuit appeared out of nowhere and drop-kicked the villain, throwing him into a nearby building. "Good morning, gentlemen. My name's Mount Lady. Pleased to meet you," she said, restraining the villain while posing to show off her greatest asset for the cameras. "Alright, I've gotta work, but it was good talking to YA, Kid," the mutant man said, turning to walk off. "Good luck on your hero journey." "Thank you," Midoriya shouted back, checking his watch in the process. The teen's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh crap, I'm gonna be late for school." With that, the green-haired villain in disguise dashed off towards the hellhole known as Aldera Middle School, trying to figure out the best possible way to get there. Over a crosswalk, past some trash cans, and down an alley he careened, avoiding a few startled cats before finding a secluded spot to stop. "No cameras here to see me. Guess I'm breaking the law today," Midoriya said, before touching the ground and activating Overhaul. As the pavement enveloped him and sucked him down into the ground, the teenager thought about how he'd adapted to his new quirk, or more accurately, quirks, over the past 2 weeks, and the heavy training he'd put in to master many of them. Overhaul was one he'd hardly scratched the surface of. Right now he could only use it to access underground maintenance tunnels, but he hypothesized that eventually he'd be able to near-instantly travel the distance by reshaping the earth around him to create a personalized subway system. The maintenance tunnels shaved a solid 5 minutes off his commute, and another use of Overhaul had him popping out of the ground in a camera-free area behind the school's tool shed. Less than a minute later, Midoriya was settling into his desk in Aldera's Class 3C, briefly looking around at how his peers pointedly ignored him. The teenager resisted the urge to sigh when he saw that his desk had been graffitied again with various messages of harassment, before touching the underside and surreptitiously activating Overhaul to repair the varnish and erase the messages. "Good morning, class," called their homeroom teacher as he entered the room and took his place behind the lectern. "Rise, Bo." "Sit," shouted the class president from the room's front, Midoriya obliging as he took part in what he considered a vapid display of obedience to the powers that be. Today's lesson was going to be career counseling for all you newly minted seniors, since this is your final year, the teacher began, taking a package of career forms out of his briefcase. A small smile flashed across the man's face as he threw them in the air with a flourish. "But we all know you want to be heroes." The other students fired off their own quirks in the air, cheering enthusiastically. Midoriya grimaced slightly and held one fist up with a half-hearted yay, but internally the display of all these fascinating quirks was weighing heavily on him. "What are you waiting for?" the voice in the back of his head said, as his hands itched and his brain felt hungry. "Take them. You have the power to do so. Why do you not use it?" "Shut up," the greenette responded internally, tamping the urge to take his classmates' quirks down internally. "Don't lump me with all these losers, Sensei," came a brash interjection from the back of the classroom. Midoriya rolled his eyes slightly as Katsuki Bakugou, certified arrogant bastard, and Aldera Middle School hotshot, stood up to boast at his classmates. Most of them would be lucky to even be D-list sidekicks out in the country somewhere. The other students began to clamor in protest and repudiate Bakugou's claim, but the noise they made was nothing compared to the relief Midoriya felt as they stopped using their quirks. This peace didn't last, however, as the teacher cut through the noise and addressed the explosion user. "You're aiming for UA High's heroics track, right, Bakugou?" The protests quickly turned into mutters of shock and awe. "UA High? The national school? Even as good as he is, can he make it? I aced the mock exams," Bakugou crowed triumphantly. "If anyone can leave this craptastic mess of a middle school behind and rise to the top, it's me, because I'm just that damn good." "Speaking of UA, Midoriya is also applying to their hero course," the teacher added. The room instantly went so silent that you could hear a pin drop, while the greenette in question stiffened slightly. And here we go, he thought to himself, rolling his eyes and counting down from 3. A moment later, the laughter hit. Midoriya? Seriously? What is he gonna do, stare the villains into submission? That doesn't seem wise, he'll get beaten up by a purse snatcher. A burning palm landed on the greenette's desk, exploding all the varnish off. Midoriya stared up with an unimpressed gaze at a clearly incensed Bakugou, the blonde seething to the point of almost steaming. I just fixed that desk, he sighed. Deku, you insignificant fuck. Bakugou roared. You've got some fucking audacity trying to stand in the same ring as me, you know that? This isn't some kind of meaningless contest, Kaken Midoriya replied in an unimpressed manner. The greenette had hated his school life for a very long time, and much of its issues had stemmed from Bakugou's strange and obsessive hatred of him. Maybe once upon a time, I would have cowered, but compared to the likes of Overhaul, Kaken, and these children are nothing, and I ended Overhaul and took everything that belonged to him, right down to his very individuality. Before the explosive blonde could reply, Midoriya casually stood up and looked around the room, completely ignoring Bakugou. It's true. A lack of quirk puts me at a natural disadvantage in the same way that a man with nothing with his bare hands would be at a disadvantage cutting wood against a man with an axe or a chainsaw. But Kaken is right. About a lot of you, many of you would be low-tier sidekicks at best. For this trick, I'll need a volunteer. Loud protests filled the room as many of the other teenagers decried the fact that their school's quirkless wonder was calling them weak. Midoriya's eyes scanned the crowd, and eventually settled on one figure in particular, a hint of vindictive glee creeping onto the greenette's face at the possibility of humiliating one of his original bullies. Thanks for volunteering, Yubiri, he said cheerfully, the students instantly shutting up as he walked over to the student in question. What do you want, Deku? Yubiri stammered as Midoriya leaned over his desk. Back at Midoriya's own desk, Bakugou was completely motionless, still processing the fact that his target had outright ignored him in favor of the rest of the class. Your quirk, long fingers, lets you extend your fingers up to a meter in length, the greenette said. Tell me, does their strength and durability also scale upwards with size? Yes, the other teen said, extending them to full length, only to be surprised when Midoriya grabbed a fistful of them and squeezed. Ouch. Oh, stop, please. Midoriya. Looks like they don't scale upwards in strength that much, Midoriya responded. Now, imagine that there's been a villain attack and a piece of rubble is about to hit a small child. If you're a good person, you extend those fingers and catch it to save her, except now your fingers are shattered and it's going to take months for you to be at full strength again. A hero who risks debilitating injury every time they use their quirk in the field won't last long in that field. Midoriya, sit down. The homeroom teacher began, only to be silenced when the greenette teenager shot him a glare that made him feel like he was being stared down by an angry demon, a little trick the teen had learned from his parents and tested on Rapper and twice. I don't remember asking you anything, Sensei. Midoriya responded, as the teacher gulped and sat down. Glaring around the room at other students, he addressed them. Yubiri is just the tip of the iceberg here. Koku, a student near the front, gulped. Your quirk just makes your neck long but doesn't increase its durability. You're an outright liability, not just disadvantaged. The boy's neck shrunk back to its normal length at Midoriya's harsh words, but now the villain leader in disguise was on a roll. Taikoku, the horned girl in the front row, sat petrified as Midoriya addressed her. Do your horns have any special abilities, or are they just a mutation? A few moments of silence passed before Midoriya continued. That's what I thought. Not useful, but not actively detrimental. You three, he shouted, pointing at a girl near the wall, another girl behind his seat, and a boy in the front row. Can any of you do more with your hair than just extend it? All three shook their heads and cowered. Stick to modeling, you'd actually be good at that. Kintsugi. Midoriya shouted, pointing at a teen seated directly behind Bakugou. Yours is actually useful, but why the hell aren't you wearing a shirt? The teen in question squeaked. When he realized his shirt was gone, hastily retrieving a spare gakuren from his bag. Hanami. Midoriya said to a boy against the back wall, who jumped when his name was called. Your quirk is just having a long nose, that looks more uncomfortable than useful. Especially with the pollen in the air. The teen nodded rapidly before blowing his oversized nose, now a deep shade of red, into a tissue from his jacket. Looking back around the classroom, Midoriya spread his arms out and addressed the class as a whole. Out of all 31 people in this classroom, only a handful of you have quirks. That would be better for heroism than outright not having one at all, he said, before pointing to the students in question. Suika. A brunette girl near the door with a water control quirk blinked in surprise. Umaru. The red-headed girl to the right of his desk squeaked, her fire quirk briefly flaring up at his acknowledgement. Kintsugi. The startled teen had just managed to put his spare jacket on and immediately snapped to attention, sighing in relief when he realized Midoriya wasn't saying something negative this time. Ishidate. A boy at the front with gravel for hair pointed a stony finger at himself with a quizzical expression, relief melting into his features when Midoriya nodded in confirmation. Mokuno. The teen gave a hesitant thumbs up, having just reconstituted his right arm from smoke. Fuwata. The dark-haired girl next to Bakugou's desk blinked a few times before slumping back into her chair. And of course, Bakugou. By this point, the blonde was silently shuddering in fury and surprise, still shook that Midoriya had ignored him until now. The brunette walked right past him and plopped back into his seat, grabbing the hand that had extended from the front of the classroom. Even your quirk isn't much to write home about, Sensei, he said, watching the man's face contort in discomfort as he plucked at one of the two elastic tendons connecting his hand to his arm like a banjo string. These tendons don't look too durable. I think I'd rather just have normal hands. Now, any questions? Deku, you bastard. Bakugou finally snapped out of his reverie with an enraged roar. How dare you dash? No quirk use in the classroom, their teacher shouted, clearly unnerved as all hell by Midoriya's little speech. The brunette grinned as Bakugou stomped off and released their teacher's hand, the elastic rebound bowling the man over before he stood up and began to talk about physics. We're not done, Deku, Bakugou growled, looming over Midoriya's desk while the brunette scribbled new notes in his notebook on the heroes he'd seen that morning. When he didn't respond after several long moments, Bakugou grabbed the notebook and pondered it for a moment. Hero analysis for the future, number 13, he thought, before clapping it between his hands and blowing it. Midoriya stopped what he was doing and looked up with an exasperated expression on his face as Bakugou threw the notebook out the open window. Well, that was rather rude, he remarked, placing his pencils back in his backpack and slinging it over his shoulder. Pay attention, god damn it, the blonde roared, slapping his hands down on top of Midoriya's desk and releasing an explosion as his compatriots with the elongated fingers and oversized nose backed up in terror. And why the hell should I do that? Midoriya countered, whirling around and slamming one fist down on the desk precariously close to Bakugou's fingers. Are you mad about that little speech from earlier? If you are, tell me one thing I said about our classmates that wasn't dead accurate. The explosive teen's eye twitched. You've got some fucking nerve saying anything about any of them with no quirk of your own, Deku. That makes you worse than useless, he roared. I'd rather have no quirk and know my limits than be an overconfident moron who thinks they're hero material despite a quirk that makes them an outright hazard. Midoriya countered. Magan, for instance. His quirk lets him pull his eyeballs out of his head. That's quite literally worse than not having one. Shut the hell up. At this point, Bakugou was running out of ways to reply. What matters is that they have quirks, something to distinguish their individuality in the eyes of society. And you don't. I wouldn't wish that fate on the worst villains to ever walk the earth. So you agree society is wrong then? Excellent. Midoriya laughed. I'm glad that even someone as arrogant as you can see what a disaster the system is. Hey, Bakugou, maybe we should leave dash. Yubiri began, only for both of the arguing 14-year-olds to round on him with fury on their faces. Shut the hell up, fingers. I don't remember asking you a goddamned thing, Yubiri. Turning back to the green-haired teen, Bakugou growled at his longtime victim. You know, Deku, there is still one option available to you. Jump off a rooftop and pray for a good quirk. In your next life, he shouted, and the room fell silent. Midoriya just stared at him for a few moments before bursting into laughter. This only confused the blonde more, and he made that fact known. What the hell's so funny, Deku? You know, I've known for the longest time that you fit a lot of different descriptors. Arrogant, loudmouthed, abrasive and distasteful, to name a few, the greenette began. But I didn't know that stupid also applied. Bakugou roared in fury and swung downwards with an explosive palm, but Midoriya dodged to the side and slung his backpack over his shoulder in the process, placing one foot on the windowsill. But you want to know something really funny, Bakugou, he said, the blonde freezing at the lack of a nickname coming from his childhood victim. Midoriya's glare intensified before he delivered the last word of their argument. Even my twitching corpse, splattered on the pavement, would be more heroic than you could ever dream to be. And then, before anyone could stop him, the green-haired teenager leapt out the window. Bakugou froze in shock while Yubiri and Hanami leapt forward to look out the window, gaping in surprise. Gone, the former asked in confusion, looking across the courtyard below. I don't see him anywhere. No body, no backpack, I don't even see anyone with green hair. Down there, Hanami said, looking around the window's viewshed. What even happened? A few blocks away, Midoriya walked down a side street. Despite what I said earlier, quirks are actually really cool, he murmured, running a hand through his hair, currently pitch black, while his eyes and backpack were both a deep cerulean blue. Color change was an incredibly useful quirk for disguises, especially since he could use it to temporarily erase his freckles. Looking down at the ruined notebook in his hand, he sighed and activated Overhaul to repair it as he passed under a bridge. A gurgling noise behind him caught the young man's attention, and he turned his head just in time to watch an enormous creature made of slime and filth climb out of a nearby manhole. Sweet Kami, I can't believe someone like him is in town, the sludge warbled. I've gotta find a suitable escape route, and fast. At this point, the creature noticed the black-haired, blue-eyed child staring at him at the exit of the bridge. Perfect, a medium-sized skin suit, he said. Hate to do this to you, kid, but thumps the brakes. With that, the sludge leapt at the teenager, only to be surprised when a look of irritation manifested on his face. Suega Dorome, cease this at once. Ack, the sludge shouted, careening to a stop. How the hell do you know my name, kid? The teenager smirked, before touching a hand to his face. As the villain stared in surprise, the kid's curly black hair turned a dark green, while his blue eyes turned a lighter shade of green and freckles dotted his face. B-boss. Hello, Mr. Sludge, Midoriya said, staring down his former subordinate. Care to tell me what you're doing attacking me on a side street in Musutafu? Please forgive me, Dorome shouted, doing his best to bow as a creature made of sore sludge. I'm just trying to escape from him. Him? Midoriya questioned. What hero are you talking about, dash? The manhole cover at the other end of the underpass exploded into the air as Mr. Sludge's eyes widened in fright. His here, the man squawked. A titanic being of muscles and blonde hair stepped out of the manhole, decked out in casual clothes and holding a bag of groceries in one hand. Have no fear, citizens, hope has arrived, boomed All Might, the strongest man alive. Because I am here. All Might. Midoriya stammered in shock, overcome by the surprise of seeing his idol in the flesh. Unhand that young man, foul villain, the symbol of peace boomed, pulling his left arm back. Midoriya's eyes widened and he prepared to call on Overhaul to get himself out of the way. Texas, smash. The blast of compressed air unleashed from All Might's fist ripped through the confined space, aimed like a cannon at Midoriya and Dorome. Look out, the sludge man warbled, wrapping himself around Midoriya as if he was attacking the teen but actually cushioning the young man from the attack. Midoriya returned to consciousness a few minutes later with the feeling of someone slapping his face repeatedly. Young man, please wake up, All Might said, before the teenager sat up and looked around. All Might. What happened to the villain? The brunette asked, before his brain caught up with his mouth. Wait, All Might. I need you to sign my notebook. Wait, you already did. He shouted, seeing the signature that the symbol of peace had placed on his entry in the notebook. Your notes are mighty impressive, young Midoriya, All Might said, holding up two soda bottles containing a familiar grey-green sludge. However, I need to get this fiend to the police station. So please keep supporting me from the sidelines. Wait, I need to ask you something, Midoriya shouted, before deciding to do something unfathomably reckless. All Might soared through the air high above Musutafu, before realizing he was experiencing an unusual amount of drag. Looking down, he realized why this was the case. Young Midoriya, what are you doing? The symbol of peace shouted over the wind. Get down at once. If I let go, I'll die. Midoriya responded, gesturing with one hand to the city far below. Oh. Fair enough, All Might responded slightly sheepishly, before a small trickle of blood came from one corner of his mouth. Shit, I'm running out of time. While All Might was looking away, Midoriya noticed the pocket containing the bulk of Dorome's sludge. It's my fault he got caught, he thought, reaching up to the pocket and activating Overhaul. If All Might's pants pocket had a hole in it, who would suspect a thing? What you did was really quite reckless and irresponsible, young Midoriya, All Might said, after the two of them had landed atop an office building. Knock on the door a few times and someone should let you in. I have to go. Wait. I need an answer from you, Midoriya said, panting on one knee after his wild ride on the number one hero's leg. Can someone without a quirk be a hero? All Might froze as a familiar pain racked his body. Shit, not yet. Becoming a hero has been all I've dreamed of since I knew what a hero was, Midoriya continued. I need to hear it from you. Can I be a hero? Internally, the young man was desperate for different reasons. Come on, take the bait, pity me and maybe I can get you to give me one for all. An explosion of steam covered the rooftop, slowly clearing to reveal the emaciated form of Toshinori Yagi. While Midoriya knew All Might had been injured as badly as his father from their clash all those years ago, even he didn't know it was going to be this bad and couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Yeah. To be continued. Chapter end notes. Author's notes. Surprise update after a week, friends. Now that we've hit canon, I have a lot more to work with, so I feel like my writing muse is back and I may be able to deliver weekly chapters. So without further ado, the recap. Midoriya's experience with Overhaul has left him deeply changed. He's not some weird, giggling psychopath who outwits every hero with no quirk like I've seen in certain villain Deku fics, not naming names here, but he is certifiably done with his classmates' nonsense and decided his teacher's breach of his privacy was a good time to make that known. I've always thought it was rich of many of Midoriya's classmates to make fun of him for not having a quirk given their own, and I wrote that into this chapter. Like the kid who can pull his eyeballs out or the one with the long neck, what the hell are they supposed to do? Their quirks seem like active detriments to heroic work. Mr. Sludge is back, and he brought the symbol of peace with him. Now Midoriya has a difficult task ahead of him, persuading All Might to choose him as a successor for his late uncle Yoichi Shigaraki's quirk, One for all. If y'all could leave some kudos and share this fic around, that would be incredible. As ever, thanks for reading. DVD 181. Next update, October 30th. Chapter notes. Worth your salt. See the end of the chapter 4. Notes. What the hell happened to you, All Might? Midoriya asked, knowing the man was injured by his father during their fight but not expecting it to be this bad. Are you somehow hurt? I'm happy you're not accusing me of being an imposter, the blonde hero chuckled, before a cough racked his form. A little over 6 years ago I was badly injured in a fight and lost my left lung, stomach, left kidney and pancreas. Since then I've been badly emaciated by my inhibited digestive capabilities and by various corrective surgeries needed to buy my career time. The man pulled his shirt up to reveal an ugly dark purple scar spiderwebbing outward from the left side of his abdomen. Midoriya felt sick at the sight, taking in just what kind of injury his father had inflicted on the symbol of peace to leave him this way. Dad, what the fuck? So to go back to your question about if someone quirkless can be a hero, that's a hard question for me to answer and would be even harder if it was not for this injury, All Might said. But if someone of my strength can be injured to this degree, if villains the caliber of the one who injured me, a man so dangerous that the government covered up his very existence, still scheme out there, then I'm not sure if I can condone someone quirkless entering this line of work. For a moment, anger flashed through the teenager's mind. You're really gonna tell me that? Despite having been born quirkless and given an ancient super quirk specifically created to kill my dad? Toshinori Yagi, you hypocritical fuck. Then it hit Midoriya, it was Yagi's injury at his father's hands that had led him to brush him off. I can understand him, but I still don't like it. I understand. What you're telling me is that either I should pursue some hero support related field, law enforcement, medical care, gear development, or marketing, or if I do heroics, I should aim for the lower profile but higher risk underground field instead of becoming a limelight hero, Midoriya said. Actually, underground might make more sense. For a lot of my activities, it would give me cover to use my quirks with less scrutiny. Yagi coughed. Well, error, I guess there could be another way he started, before the sound of distant explosions cut through the low hum of day-to-day life in Musutafu. Both Midoriya and Yagi looked towards the source of the noise, a plume of dark smoke rising from Tatooine Ward. Oh. A few blocks away, Katsuki Bakugou thrashed for dear life, the giant mass of sour sludge restraining him, making sure to fire his blasts away from anywhere that could potentially harm it. Hold still, kid, it warbled, directing another attempted blast towards the local heroes that had gathered nearby. The explosion missed and lit a fruit stall on fire. What the fuck are those losers doing? The explosive blonde wondered as he watched Death Arms, Backdraft, Slugger, Kamu Woods, Mount Lady and the Fly all argue with each other about why each of them couldn't go rescue him. Am I hallucinating this crap, or am I really about to die at the hands of someone made from shit because heroes are fucking useless? At that point, Izuku Midoriya burst from the crowd, an irate look on his face as he rushed towards the sludge man and the teenager caught in his grasp. Deku coming to save my ass. Yeah, I'm definitely hallucinating this shit, Bakugou thought to himself, closing his eyes and preparing to meet his end. To his surprise, however, the greenette yanked him out of the sludge, which felt somehow thinner. Maybe it was just his imagination. A moment later, he felt a massive hand grab the back of his collar. Opening his eyes, Bakugou was stunned by the sight of his idol, All Might holding back the sludge pseudopod with one arm. To think I almost became a bunch of empty platitudes in a cheap suit. Thank you for the reminder of what heroism means. All Might boomed. Now you should probably hold on for dear life, young Midoriya. Detroit, smash. A hurricane exploded to life next to Bakugou's face, the sludge villain screaming as he was splattered all against the pavement. The blonde was vaguely aware of his longtime victim hanging off of the back of All Might's leg and screaming at the top of his lungs, while people on the sidelines hunkered down as best they could until the winds dissipated. A few moments later, a simple drop of water hit the teenager's cheek, followed by another. And then another. The sky turned dark and began to rain, while onlookers gawked in awe. Even that damned nerd Deku was looking around in amazement. He changed the weather itself, with just one punch. I didn't need your help, Deku. Izuku Midoriya sighed and rolled his eyes, turning around to face his longtime bully. That's an odd way of saying thank you for saving my life even though I tried to bully you into suicide today, Bakugou the Greenette said. By the way, you're welcome. Bakugou actually had the audacity for a moment to look downright shocked, before regaining his composure. Whatever, just don't get in my way, he shouted, before storming down the street. Midoriya watched him go, then laughed. Well, all's well that ends well, I guess, he chuckled, turning to head down to his own house, only to be surprised when All Might popped out from an alley into the middle of the road. I am here, with an offer, the man began, only to deflate in a puff of steam and spurt of blood. Sweet Cammy, are you all right? Midoriya yelled, pulling a few tissues from his pack and handing them to the pro to wipe the blood off his face. How did you even escape the parasites back there after defeating the sludge? The man laughed and wiped the blood off his face. Young Midoriya, 30 years as a professional hero and an additional 9 spent learning about heroics across high school, undergraduate education and graduate school has given me plenty of experience dealing with the press, he said, a small grin on his face, before straightening to address the teen. But that's not why I'm here. You saved not just the life of that other boy back there, but you saved me as well. I would have become nothing but a cheap suit stuffed with empty platitudes about heroism, not the symbol that society depends on, had you not moved me to act. With that, the number 1 hero got down on his knees and bowed in a full dejezer to Midoriya. I'm truly sorry for what I said earlier, because I was wrong, young man, you can become a hero. Midoriya gaped and gasped at the man's apologetic display, but internally he was shocked for different reasons. Holy crap, is he actually going to offer it to me? Standing up, Toshinori Yagi held one hand forward and seemed to glow with an ethereal light. You could become the kind of underground hero you mentioned earlier, but if you wish to be a limelight hero, there is another way you can do it. Izuku Midoriya, I possess the only truly transferable quirk in the world, and would like to pass it along to you as my successor. The world's only what? Midoriya asked in surprise. Internally, his jubilance was reaching critical mass. Oh my god, he actually offered it to me. Over the years many people have wondered what kind of quirk I have. A strength quirk. Speed. Maybe something that amplifies my statistics according to my moral righteousness. Personally, I always like to deflect by saying I just ate healthy foods growing up, but the truth is much different. My quirk is a transferable energy stockpiling quirk called One for All. Yagi said, the ethereal light in his palm intensifying 1,000-fold. I am this quirk's 8th wielder, and would like you to be the 9th. Do you accept? I accept. Midoriya shouted without hesitation, immediately bowing. Excellent. All Might laughed. However, your physical strength needs to be improved a lot before you receive this quirk. I have spent 39 years cultivating its power and adding to the stockpile, so you risk crippling yourself if you're not in good enough shape for it. Holding out a business card with contact information written on it, Yagi finished his explanation. Meet me this Saturday at 6 a.m. at Dagobah Beach Municipal Park to begin training for UA High's entrance exam. In this form, I'm just Toshinori Yagi, All Might's secretary, and yes, that is my real name. Now I must go, and you should too, but I look forward to getting started. With that, the man turned and walked off down the street, presumably to hail a taxicab. Midoriya stared at the card in his hands for a few moments before pumping his fist and whooping in delight after making sure nobody was around to see his outburst. I'm really getting one for all. Time to bring my uncle's Quirk back to the family. A few minutes later, Midoriya returned home and opened the front door just in time to be swept up in a crushing hug by his mother. Izuku, I'm so glad you're safe, she cried, hugging and crying on him. The teenager was used to his mother's emotional outbursts, but was still somewhat surprised by the immense strength she seemed to have hidden for years. It's good to be home, Mom, Izuku said as his mother released him. As he took off his shoes, the teenager continued to talk to the green-haired housewife. Is Dad here? Your father? He's back in his study again, Inko said. If I had to guess, he's probably plotting bloody murder against that sludge man from earlier. Well, that won't do at all. Both Dad and I owe Dorom-san a debt of thanks now, Izuku said, tracing a path to the door of his father's office and knocking twice. Dad, I'm home. Come in, Hisashi said, his son obliging and opening the door to find the older man sketching out a murder plan on a napkin. Plotting to kill Mr. Sludge? That won't do, we both owe him one now, the greenette teen said, grabbing the plans out from in front of Hisashi. Care to explain why I shouldn't kill someone who tried to grievously injure you, Izuku? Hisashi asked, crossing his arms. Izuku smirked. Well, without him creating that little incident with Bakugou, I wouldn't have been able to impress a certain hero into taking me on as his successor and making plans to give me a very valuable item that he is the 8th holder of, the greenette said, watching his father's expression slowly morph from confusion to surprise to abject glee as his words sunk in. No way, Hisashi breathed slowly, disbelief in his voice. He didn't dash. My training to become the 9th holder of one for all starts this Saturday 6 a.m. at Dagobah Beach, Izuku said, a cheeky grin spreading across his face. I'm getting Uncle Yoichi's Quirk back in the family, Dad. The ever-stoic demon lord who had terrorized Japan's underworld for over a century couldn't hold it in anymore. With a whoop of joy, Hisashi Shigaraki embraced his son, a look of delight on his face. Incredible, Izuku. You've accomplished my single greatest goal. In less than 6 months as a villain, he laughed. Izuku chuckled slightly. I guess I have, Dad. Could you call Oboro-san? I need to go meet up with Tenko and Himiko. This development means we're going to have to change all our plans by a lot. Hisashi released his son, still smiling. Of course. But before you go, I have 2 quirks that I want to offer you to prepare for using one for all, he said. What do they do? Izuku asked. Great Gains is an exercise quirk that passively increases muscle and bone density based on diet and exercise. If that blonde oaf is going to be training you, you'll need every advantage you can get to make the most of it, Hisashi said as his son rolled his eyes about his father's dismissal of his idol. The other is shock absorption, which should mitigate any backlash you have from using it after he passes it to you. I'll take both, Izuku said, his quirk's hunger acting up again at the promise of new fodder. The two shook hands, both briefly struggling for control in an amiable tug-of-war before Hisashi sighed and let the 2 parcels be consumed by Izuku's own quirk factor. One quick phone call later and the green-haired teen was in Kamino Ward, Yokohama, face to face with his League of Villains. Good news, everyone, he said. The parcel known as OFA is secure. That night, the lights were on at Oboro's Backalley Tavern long into the wee hours of the morning, closed for a private party. And if a D-rank villain with a sludge body quirk happened to disappear from a medium security prison cell a few days later at around the same time that a perfectly legal soda company that totally wasn't a money laundering front hired a new accountant, well, whose business was that? A few days later, Dagobah Beach Municipal Park. What a dump, Midoriya remarked, looking out over the trash and scrap metal piled high across the so-called park. How could this happen, anyway? Pretty bad, isn't it? Yagi agreed in his small mite form. Further down the coast, people used to dump trash in the ocean, and eventually the currents carried it ashore here. It later turned out to be the work of a hydrokinetic villain with a vendetta against the Shizuoka Coastal Commission, and the trash stopped coming in that way, but locals saw it as a place to dump everything from tin cans to appliances free of charge, and now it looks like this. Midoriya sighed. Human pettiness and laziness at work again. Why am I not surprised? I take it you plan on having me clean this? Yagi nodded. You're correct. Heroes weren't always flying billboards the way they seem to be nowadays. Back when I was a teenager, many were involved in community service efforts. Like this cleanup would be. I want you to show this community that you're a true hero long before you ever set foot in UA High. To his surprise, the teenager already had his jacket off and was doing some warm-up stretches. What are we waiting for then, Yaga-sensei? Let's get started, the greenette shouted, pulling on a pair of reinforced gloves and practically leaping headlong into a pile of old washing machines. This kid. Yagi thought to himself, a smile forming on his face. You've got it, young Midoriya. I'll pull the truck around, the symbol of peace shouted, his protégé's infectious enthusiasm filling him with a passion for life he thought had died when he woke up in the hospital after his last fight with All for One. Days turned to weeks, and then weeks turned to months as the villain heir followed his hero mentor's aim to pass, American dream plan, slowly clearing the trash from the beach. Despite All Might's initial concerns about Midoriya's pacing, the teenager didn't suffer any exhaustion issues, assuring his mentor that he was simply getting enough sleep to not suffer any drawbacks. After all, Yagi didn't know about the exercise Quirk boosting his protégé's fitness training. Not that it wasn't exhausting, of course. Midoriya was so tired when he got back from school and training that he barely spoke to his father and had no idea what Tenko was up to, though he knew they were doing something behind his back. Finally, a crisp autumn morning came 6.5 months later in late October, when Yagi parked his truck at the seawall overlooking Dagobah Beach and nearly choked in surprise. From south to north, every square inch of the sand was clear of trash and debris. Clear water lapped at the beachfront while seagulls dove down to grab clams exposed by the tide, and for a moment he even swore he saw a sea turtle dragging herself ashore to lay eggs. And there, standing atop the last stack of appliances at the very edge of the beach where a recycling service came to pick them up every Monday, the symbol of peace saw his disciple raise one fist in the face of the rising sun and shout in triumph at the top of his lungs. Oh, my goodness! Yagi shouted, buffing up into his muscle form and dashing across the beach just in time to catch Midoriya's fall. How does it look, Yaga-sensei? The greenette asked breathlessly. All Might's signature smile widened. Young Midoriya, you've exceeded my every expectation. I didn't even think it would be possible to clean the beach by next February, yet you did it in just over half the time, he said, carefully setting the teen back on his feet. And look at you, kid. You were skinny when I first met you, but now? Now you're outright jacked. Midoriya smiled weakly and looked down at his well-muscled physique. Great Gains was truly an amazing quirk, and at that moment the future hero and aspiring crime lord decided. One thing was for certain, he was never giving it back to his dad. I guess I have come a long way, haven't I? You have truly gone beyond in the pursuit of excellence, and your effort begets a reward, Yagi said, reaching up to pluck a strand of hair from his own head. My own mentor once said that a gift you're given for hard work isn't a gift, it's simply what you deserve, what you are owed. Now, eat this. What? Midoriya asked after a few moments of silence. The transfer works when you digest something containing the previous user's DNA. All Might explained. I figured hair would be one of the least disgusting options. I have a thermos of coffee over there that you could put a drop of blood in. I think that would be significantly less gross than eating hair, Midoriya responded flatly. A sheepish look crossed All Might's face. Maybe you're right. Let's do that instead. Young Midoriya. Several quick swigs and 10 laps up and down the beach later, and a strange sensation like electricity flowed briefly through Midoriya's limbs, before settling into more of a low, humming sensation vibrating through all his cells. Yaga-sensei, I think I just digested it. The teenager called, coming to a stop in front of his mentor. Glad to hear it, young Midoriya Yagi responded, getting off the recently installed park bench. In that case, I think it's time to start training with One for All. The ocean should be clear outwards from here within the range of your current power. Go ahead and stir things up. With a Detroit smash. Alright, Midoriya said, turning and walking down to the shoreline. Taking a power stance, the green-haired teen focused on calling up the storm of energy from within the pit of his stomach, while also drawing on one of the newer quirks in his collection. Shock. Absorption, just to be safe. The teen clenched his fist and opened his eyes, drawing one arm back as the incredible power within him flowed into the appendage and out into the world. Detroit, smash. A veritable storm of energy exploded into the world from the end of his fist, ripping a massive channel in the ocean outward for several kilometers before dissipating. A grin split Yagi's face as the wind whipped past his face, until he noticed his successor's bruised arm. Young Midoriya, are you alright? The teenager turned to face his mentor and held the bruised appendage up with a pained grin. It doesn't feel broken, but it does hurt a lot. I think I may have sprained something. Is there a good way to get this repaired before my parents panic? He asked. Yagi coughed blood for a second before grabbing his phone and hitting a button on it. Pick up, pick up, pick up, he muttered, before a voice crackled through the other end. Oh dear, Toshinori, you seem to have gotten yourself and your successor into quite a pickle. This time. Nezu, how did you dash? Yagi began, before remembering who he was talking to. On second thought, I'm not going to ask more questions about how you knew my successor had hurt himself. Just tell Recovery Girl we're going to need her, okay? I can do that. And to answer your question, I hacked all the cameras near Dagobah Beach. It's been a slow day here at UA. Right, Yagi said, letting out a breath of relief when the line disconnected with a click. Young Midoriya, I'm going to drive you to UA to have your arm treated by Recovery Girl. You should rest on the way, take a nap in the truck if you feel the need. The young man nodded wearily and followed his mentor to his obnoxiously yellow pickup truck, managing to get in with only one arm with mild difficulty. He quickly found himself dozing off despite the pain, the noise of traffic fading away as he found himself surrounded by a thick black mist with a large metal door in the middle. Where the heck am I? Is this a dream? Midoriya wondered to himself. And what's behind this door? The green-haired teen reached towards the door, only for a hand to grab his wrist, a hand clad in a yellow glove. A light coughing sound alerted him to the presence of a third person. Turning towards the source, he was met with the visage of a person he'd only seen once as a solitary photograph on his father's desk once, and when he looked back at the other individual he saw a woman noticeably resembling his mother. Uncle Yoichi? Grandma Shimura? Is this the inside of One for All? The teenager wondered. Hello, Izuku, his uncle said. As you may have guessed, we have a lot to talk about. Chapter End Notes. Author's Notes. The pace is picking up as canon starts rolling along. This chapter we finished the sludge villain incident and most of Midoriya's training arc. To summarize, All Might has recanted his previous statement on Midoriya's potential, but his concerns are much more valid than a lot of the fandom gives him credit for. We've seen exactly 3 notable heroes in canon with non-offensive quirks, Night Eye, Midnight, and Eraserhead, and currently 2 are dead and 1 is badly injured. I think Yagi's concerns are very justified. Did I just give the sludge villain a happy ending? Yes I did. Having access to a walking quirk bank more than willing to let you take out a loan is incredibly handy. Great gains and shock absorption are going to be valuable additions to Midoriya's arsenal, even if one just helps him get good exercise and the other is flecked. Turns quirk if AFO had bought it at Walmart. Midoriya's improved fitness from the exercise quirk and his use of shock absorption saved him from what happened to Canon Midoriya in his first OFA use, but don't worry. This is about rock bottom for his use of OFA. He'll get better. Next chapter is going to be a little chat with the Vestiges, our introduction to the rat god, and a look at exactly what the hell Tenko and Hisashi have been working on recently. As ever, thanks for reading, and leave kudos if you haven't already. Peace. DVD 181. Next update, November 6th. Chapter notes. Conversing with cryptids. Surprise Halloween update. See the end of the chapter for more. Notes. The heavy metal door swung open within the empty void, revealing a room that Midoriya would never have guessed existed from the other side of it. Inside, a group of 8 chairs was arrayed around an ethereal campfire. Yoichi snapped his fingers and the chairs rearranged themselves as a 9th was added. Have a seat, Izuku, the white-haired man said. We have much we need to talk about. The teenager nodded, an expression of awe on his face. As he went to sit down, however, Midoriya felt like he was being watched, a feeling that quickly became one of imminent danger. Next thing he knew, his grandmother had grabbed the back of his collar and pulled him out of his chair. A moment later, the chair was smashed to pieces by the fist of a blonde-haired man wearing a combat jacket and a black bandana, his hair tied up in a ponytail. What are you doing, third? Yoichi shouted, holding one arm out protectively in front of his nephew. I knew you were naive about the newer wielders, Yoichi, but this is ridiculous. You're allowing all for one's handpicked heir to become the 9th, the now identified third holder said, straightening back up. You've let sentimentality cloud your judgment too much. He lied to 8th too. A clicking noise alerted Midoriya to another threat, the teenager barely dodging a projectile launched by another blonde-haired man with a scar on his face and gauntlets on his arms. The Greenette quickly decided that this man bore far too much of a resemblance to Bakugou for his liking. Second, don't dash. Yoichi began, before a tendril of dark energy wrapped around the man's gauntlet and directed it upwards. Whoa, what's all the fuss about? Asked a bald man in a leather jacket as he stepped out of the void's shadows, the energy tendrils extending from his left hand. Don't tell me you two are already picking on 9th. He's a threat to society. Second began, only to get backhanded with a vengeance by Nana. Do not speak of either of my grandsons in that manner just because of who raised them. Second, the irate woman spoke. Izuku and Tenko could have been raised by the devil himself, but they're still my family. Are you implying they weren't? Fifth chuckled, before a withering glare from Nana shut him down. Sorry, Oh dear, drama this early, a short man wearing a high-collared jacket asked as he emerged from the gloom and sat down on a chair with the number 6 emblazoned at the top. He was followed by a white-haired man with 2 unique scars on the left side of his face, who sat down on the chair marked with a 4. We're just trying to keep Yoichi from making a terrible mistake, En third growled. Maybe you should let him explain himself first, instead of punching first and asking questions later. Just a thought, the 4th holder said. Are you insane, Shinomori? Second retorted. Yoichi snapped his fingers for attention. I think that's enough out of both of you, he said, gesturing towards the mist opposite from the door, which cleared slightly to reveal a large brick wall. Second, third, you can both go stand against the wall until you've changed your minds and are willing to hear my nephew out. The 2 men grumbled but both turned and began to walk towards the aforementioned wall. You're making a terrible mistake, third said as he walked away. That kid is going to turn out just like his father, mark my words. Yoichi sighed and snapped his fingers again, the chair marked with a 9 repairing itself. I'm sorry you had to deal with them already, Izuku. They've got even stronger views on my brother than the rest of us do, he said. Have a seat, we still have a lot to talk about. It's all right, the teenager responded, sitting down in the seat. I'd be pretty mad too if the son of my murderer waltzed into my mausoleum. The bald man laughed. He's got a sense of humor. First, I already like him. Holding one fist out for a fist bump, the man smiled. Daigoro Banjo, fifth holder, and formally. The pro-hero lariat, at your service. As Midoriya hesitantly bumped the man's fist, the white-haired man in the chair across from Daigoro coughed lightly. If we're doing introductions, I'll go next. Hikage Shinomori. Fourth holder and once upon a time the vigilante vagabond, he said, smiling softly and nodding. En Oyashiro, sixth holder, and the pro-hero plume, the high-collared man said. Nana Shimura, seventh holder, and formerly the pro-hero Titania, his grandmother, said. I'm glad to see that my family still exists, even after I made the mistake of letting them go, but I'm disappointed in you for lying to Toshinori. The brunette looked away sheepishly at the last part. Yoichi Shigaraki, your uncle and the progenitor of One for All, Yoichi said. But you already knew that. A golden light blazed into existence in the chair next to Yoichi, slowly transforming into a spectral figure that Midoriya knew all too well. All Might. He's still not all here yet, and won't be until he dies, but yes, even Toshinori Yagi is represented here, Yoichi said. We'll hold off on introducing second and third until they cool their heads enough to be reasonable, so instead let's talk about your goals and why you want to be a hero. And so Midoriya spilled everything to the previous users of One for All. The teenager expressed his dislike of how commercialized modern heroics was, how stagnant and complacent the general populace had become, and how heroics had evolved into a bastardized form of public entertainment instead of a matter of public safety. He expressed his disgust with how unfalteringly corrupt the Heroic Public Safety Commission was, and how bizarrely restrictive Quirk use laws were. How so many heroes seemed to be in it for the money and recognition now, instead of being truly altruistic and community-minded like All Might and so few others these days were. Then he moved on to the villains. He talked about how stability in the Japanese underworld had broken down after his father's retirement, leaving a power vacuum that caused crime to skyrocket nationwide as various groups fought it out. How monsters like Overhaul could walk the streets with impunity because there was no higher authority in the underbelly of society to keep people like him in check. And of course, how many people had become villains simply because they slipped through the cracks of society, people like Himiko or Tenko, for instance. At the end of his lecture, the teenager collapsed back into his chair, winded from having spoken at such length about his goals and his gripes with the state of modern society. His predecessors blinked owlishly at him a few times, still taking in his words. After a few long moments of silence, Hikage began to clap. I'm impressed, Ninth, the man said. You're committed enough to societal reform and saving people that get overlooked these days that you're willing to become a boogeyman like your father and be the symbol that fights that boogeyman. Not many are devoted enough to play both sides like that. You're pretty funky, kid, Daigoro added, clapping and laughing jovially. At Midoriya's quizzical look, the bald man clarified. It's a compliment, Ninth. You already saved my other grandson, Izuku, Nana said, a soft smile on her face. I look forward to seeing just how many more people you'll end up saving. En chose not to say anything, simply nodding in approval and applauding. Yoichi grinned. I guess it's settled then. We have a 5-2 vote of confidence in Izuku Midoriya's status as the ninth holder of One for All. Thank you for your trust, I won't let you down, Midoriya responded, standing up and bowing. On to another matter. The stockpile has hit critical mass and One for All has achieved singularity, Yoichi said, and the void instantly fell silent. Then, is it time? Daigoro ventured. Yoichi nodded. With One for All's awakening, the 6 quirks stockpiled therein will be available with the blessing of each vestige here. I imagine the synergistic effect it will have with Izuku's form of all for one will be quite fascinating. Oh, other quirks? Midoriya wondered aloud. Wait, I'll inherit your quirks. Bingo. Yoichi said, making a finger guns gesture at his nephew. With their agreement and acceptance of you as ninth holder, you'll get access to these fours. Quirks. The white-haired man gestured around at the other vestiges seated around the spectral campfire. Black whip. Daigoro gave a thumbs up. Danger sense. Hikage smiled softly. Smoke screen. Ien nodded slightly. And float. Nana clasped her hands together, a comforting slime on her face. And eventually we'll get those two grumperpants back there to come around, and then you'll have access to their quirks too. Second and third continued to lean against the wall, giving no indication they'd even heard Yoichi. Wait a minute, Midoriya said, standing up and looking around the vault. If all for one, and one for all are two quirks that both contain other quirks, can I trade those quirks between them? A look of surprise crossed the faces of each of the previous vestiges. Try it out then, Yoichi said, walking over to his nephew and placing one hand on his shoulder. I want to see if you can pull this off. Midoriya nodded and closed his eyes, concentrating on his own quirk and trying to imagine a similar room to this one, connecting one for all to all for one. As the previous wielders watched in shock, with even second and third turning to stare, a simple wooden door popped out of the ground and grafted itself to the wall, bits of brick dust raining down from it. And now, let's see if I can call someone else here, Midoriya thought, concentrating again. A few moments later, the doorknob turned and the door opened, a bright light shining through and illuminating the dark void. A tall, strongly built man with blonde hair and a mustache stepped through, blinking in surprise. Fascinating, a new world for me to explore, the man wondered aloud in English. Before noticing his present company. Excuse me? Can anyone tell me what year it is? And where I am? I need to know if it's leg day yet. The year is 2145 and you're inside a quirk. Can I ask you what your name is? Midoriya said. Good heavens, is this the work of a meta ability? The man asked. Oh, but where are my manners? My name is Theodore Marshall Hemingway, explorer extraordinaire. I seem to last recall being on a hiking trip in Hokkaido shortly after the Japanese Civil War ended in 2052. Today we call meta abilities quirks, and you're currently inside mine, Midoriya said. My name is Izuku Midoriya. Can I ask you what your ability is? Why certainly, young man, the explorer said. It helps me put on muscle when I work out, and I call it great gains. As if to emphasize his point, the man struck a pose, his muscles bulging against his jacket sleeves. Interesting dash, Midoriya began, before he suddenly lifted off the ground and flew back towards the door. I must be waking up in the real world now. I'll be back soon. Sitting up with a start, the greenette teenager sneezed and looked around the medical room he was in. Is this you, eh? He wondered aloud. Oh good, the smelling salts were enough to wake you, an elderly voice said from his bedside. Looking over, Midoriya recognized the short old woman putting a cork back in a small brown bottle. You're the youthful heroine, recovery girl, he said excitedly, pulling out a notebook and pencil. You've got one of the most powerful healing quirks on record and are instrumental to UA's success. Can I have your autograph? The old woman sighed. Kids these days, always so focused on these things, she chuckled. I was worried when Toshinori brought you in, but your arm was in decent enough condition for being a first-time user of one for all. A sprained wrist, 2 pulled muscles, and a fractured tibia aren't too bad relative to what you could have suffered. I see, Midoriya said, pondering his options. Where is Yaga-sensei, anyway? Recovery girl finished signing his notebook and handed it back to him. He's up in Nezu's office, waiting for you. The principal wants to speak with you, he finds you interesting. For some reason, this made Midoriya break out in a cold sweat. A few minutes later, The greenette brought his hand up to knock on the door to Nezu's office. Only for the structure to swing inwards. Midoriya sighed and looked at the creature sitting behind the large Italian maplewood desk. Cameras.